Chapter 212, Same Level Showdown, So You Finally Came to Meet Your Death. The eighth prince said in a cold voice. Just because your practice time is 10 years ahead of mine, don't get ahead of yourself. Yi Shiwen contemptuously sneered, I'll crush you like an ant under my feet if we fight at the same level. You're just trying to provoke me, but I will kill you, no one can save you now. The eighth prince said in a cold voice, then took a step forward and took a commanding gesture while intently watching Yi Shiwen. The eighth prince's eyes were shining just like the ice-cold iron while a large mass of Zhen Yuan was roaring on his body. There was an invincible confidence on his face and it could be seen that he was not at all conceited about his strength. The terrifying strength he was displaying right now was the reason behind his unmatched self-confidence. Chop down this bastard prince into pieces. Does he actually think of himself as the emperor of Great Yu State? He is nothing but an arrogant prince. Yes, there are over a dozen princes in the empire, the whole avenue is filled with princes, might as well consider them as dogs, don't hold back and completely chop him off. The disciples of Yi Yuan school suddenly started to clamor. If the eighth prince was fighting at his full strength, then in their eyes, Yi Shiwen wouldn't have a shred of chance of winning, but now the situation was different. Yi Shiwen was able to kill Feng Kong, who was at a higher level. So, how could he possibly lose in the same level battle? You are done for, because even on the same level, I am invincible. The eighth prince coldly snorted and said. We won't be sure about that before the battle starts. Yi Shiwen said in a cold voice. Even if the eighth prince was on a higher level, it would be difficult to defeat him, but if it were to lose in the same level battle then he might as well just commit suicide. The killing intention was surging and causing air explosions everywhere, producing violent explosion sounds. Both of their killing intentions were colliding fiercely and none of them seemed to yield. Yi Ziwen's imposing aura completely released out, just like dreadful sea waves, and swept across the surrounding area. The terrifying aura of Truth fourth stage instantly released out, as he stared coldly at the eighth prince. It seemed like both of them were prepared to begin the same level battle any second. After practicing for a month, Yi Shiwen finally broke from the peak of Truth third stage to the peak of Truth fourth stage in one fell swoop across, but his battle efficiency didn't fully achieve a breakthrough to the Truth sixth stage. Although he expected his battle efficiency to reach the Truth sixth stage, but it still remained in the small Truth realm. Truth fifth stage. There was a huge difference between the battle efficiencies offered by Truth fifth stage and Truth sixth stage. In fact, even if Yi Shiwen was able to break into the Truth fourth stage, his battle efficiency could only touch the early traces of Truth sixth stage. However, Yi Shiwen was confident that if he could break through to the Truth fifth stage, his battle efficiency would directly step into the peak of Truth sixth stage, and then, he would also be able to contend with the experts of Truth seventh stage. This time, this major enhancement in Yi Ziwen's cultivation was mainly due to the Deepwater Black Snake King's Naiden. After he was beheaded by the black-clothed old man, Yi Shiwen had discussed with the ninth prince about handing over the Naiden to him. The ninth prince also very readily agreed to Yi Ziwen's request, because he knew that this Naiden would help towards crazy enhancement in Yi Ziwen's strength. And as he had already said that they had a common enemy, therefore he didn't hesitate in handing it over to Yi Shiwen. Also, by relying on this half-step legendary realm Naiden, Yi Ziwen's cultivation skyrocketed all the way from the peak of Truth third stage to the peak of Truth fourth stage, and so far, he had only consumed 1/3 of the entire Naiden. If the eighth prince hadn't arrived all of a sudden, then he would have continued to consume the remaining Naiden, and would have reached all the way to the small Truth realm. By that time, he could have sufficient battle strength to deal with the eighth prince at full strength. Now, the eighth prince was at the peak of Truth sixth stage and he had reaped big benefits from his adventure trip to ancient ruins. However, he didn't have time to consume the looted exploits from the ruins. As soon as he obtained the news about Feng Kong's death at the hands of Yi Shiwen, he was very furious and rushed back. No one dared to lay their hands on his imperial guards, but this Yi Shiwen actually slaughtered the commander of imperial guards. How could he possibly tolerate such a thing? Ha 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 ha. The eighth prince laughed while a domineering aura was overflowing throughout his body and his cold eyes were glaring at Yi Shiwen, as if he was looking at a dead man. It seemed like no one else existed in his world but himself. The eighth prince was exuding a transcendental aura as if he had been baptized in the ancient ruins. After returning from that place, he had become much more extraordinary than before. Well, since it's the same level battle, it should be fair. The voice transmitted from the depths of Yi Yuan School, and the big hand extended towards the eighth prince's body and placed a seal on his cultivation, limiting it to the small truth realm, thereby making his cultivation level same as that of Yi Shiwen. Even now, the eighth prince still held a considerable advantage. After all, Yi Shiwen could only compete with experts of small truth realm or below, but only when his opponents were ordinary experts, and the eighth prince couldn't be taken lightly, considering his 10 years of extra experience and unbeatable battle record. Not to forget, he was the undefeated genius of the younger generation, so his battle prowess was going to be tyrannical even with the seal on. Whatever be the case, there was self-confidence brimming on his face even after the seal was applied on his cultivation by the big hand. He was certain that he would kill Yi Shiwen today, not to mention, it could be said that even after applying a seal on his power, he was still at a higher level than Yi Shiwen when considering Yi Ziwen's actual cultivation level. If he was still unable to kill Yi Shiwen, then he might as just commit suicide. Prepare to die. Here I come. The eighth prince roared, and his roar broke through the limits of rivers and mountains. He rushed straight towards Yi Shiwen, while bringing shock waves of air along with him. It seemed as if a massive mountain was falling towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also roared at the same time and instantly released a tremendous amount of Jin Yuan from his body, and immediately, a long blade appeared in his hand as he furiously chopped out a large arc of blade light towards the eighth prince. Boom! The spear in the eighth prince's hand severely collided with Yi Ziwen's long blade and induced a terrifying blast in the surrounding region. This blast was so intense that it twisted the space itself and sent both of them flying back. The battle efficiency of both sides was incomparably horrifying. Since Yi Shiwen could display the battle strength of Small Truth Realm, and despite being sealed to Small Truth Realm, the eighth prince could still display the battle strength of higher levels, thanks to his huge battle experience. This round could be considered as a draw, pertaining to the same level of skills the two of them showed just now. When the eighth prince had heard the news about Feng Kong's death, he got so angry that it seemed as if his anger would burn the sky. He couldn't wait to consume the exploits from his latest adventure and directly rushed to kill Yi Shiwen. If he had gotten a chance to assimilate the treasures, then he would be much more tyrannical than now. Yi Shiwen was slightly surprised a moment. How could the enemy be so terrifying even after suppressing his level to the Small Truth Realm? No wonder he was so confident that he came straight to Yi Yuan School from the ruins, solely to kill Yi Shiwen. If the eighth prince hadn't suppressed his cultivation level, then while facing him at his real strength, perhaps, Yi Shiwen really wouldn't stand a chance. But, Yi Shiwen did not lose confidence even though the enemy was so formidable. So what if the enemy was tyrannical? As everyone said, if Yi Shiwen was given the option to practice for 10 years, he would be able to take on the eighth prince. However, what they didn't know that he actually wouldn't require 10 years to surpass the eighth prince. I can see that you have got some means to fight back, but you and I are sworn enemies from the moment you opposed me, and without a doubt, you are doomed to die. The eighth prince slowly expressed his hatred. Yi Shiwen was somewhat speechless. When did he actually choose to oppose this eighth prince? In reality, he had been forced into all of this mess. However, afterward, he certainly did things to provoke the eighth prince. His overbearing style could be easily inferred. In fact, it could be easily traced back to the same origin as that of Feng Kong and the other imperial guards. However, it was obvious that he was completely mistaken about the concepts of power and prestige. One could literally see stars exploding in Yi Ziwen's ice-cold eyes, as if the universe was taking birth in the depths of his eyes. You talk too much nonsense. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly, and the long blade danced in his hand. A long arc of blade light crawled through the sky and fell towards the eighth prince. This blade attack was so tyrannical and terrifying, it seemed as if the sky was breaking apart into several pieces. The eighth prince's spear pierced through the sky, and layer after layer of energy waves swept across in all directions, while the tyrannical spear attack advanced towards Yi Ziwen's blade attack. The spectators could clearly hear the roaring sounds of two mighty forces, but Yi Shiwen, in particular, appeared exceptionally overbearing and tyrannical. It seemed as if he commanded a mighty force. In fact, even his imposing aura resembled that of an overlord of the battlefield. Yi Ziwen's killing intention and imposing aura were so overwhelming that they were directly affecting the people's consciousness. In a flash, the blade attack fiercely collided with spear attack and resulted in an astounding explosion. Boom! A giant mushroom ascended towards the sky. The two tyrannical attacks mutually obliterated each other and gave birth to this giant mushroom cloud, which continued to get bigger and swept across, engulfing everything on the way. The disciples suddenly looked frightened. Was this really a duel between two experts at Small Truth Realm? Some of the disciples were caught in the aftermath of that terrifying explosion and were seriously injured. If they were not being protected by the barrier enchantment, set up and maintained by an elder of Yi Yuan school, which blocked most of the complementary shock waves from the blast, then they wouldn't have survived at all. But even so, some of the disciples got injured because several cracks appeared on the barrier enchantment. Due to that, the elder who was charged with maintaining the barrier enchantment had to increase its toughness in order to resist the upcoming tyrannical collisions like this. Boom! They collided again since there wasn't the slightest pause in this duel. Both sides continued to attack again and again. An incomparably scary light erupted in the horizon and completely obscured the entire sky. Chapter 213. For sacred beasts, not even a minute had passed since the duel began, but the two experts already exchanged more than 10 moves, with each being extremely terrifying and earth-shattering. Their speeds were rising slowly and gradually, and in a while, to the eyes of spectators, it seemed as if both of them turned into colorful streamers of light and were rapidly colliding back and forth. In fact, the Xiantian-level disciples could merely see the fierce collisions between a blue light and a yellow light. And even for the truth-level experts, it was getting difficult to clearly observe this duel since they couldn't follow the movements of the two contenders. All they could see was a duel between two afterimages. It's really horrible that these two peerless heroes of this generation had to bump into each other, so early. Right, although the 8th prince is arrogant, but we must admit that his strength simply goes against the heaven's will. He is definitely not some ordinary braggart. Even in a low-level battle with Yi Shiwen, he is able to display such battle efficiency. I must say that both his talent and strength defy the heaven's will. Although we must also consider that Yi Ziwen's cultivation level is too far behind that of the 8th prince, but he still managed to fight back on equal terms. Not to forget, even after putting the seal on the 8th prince's cultivation, the resulting level was Small Truth, and Yi Ziwen's actual cultivation is less than that, but Yi Shiwen still didn't fall under the wind. It is too shocking. I am afraid we will have to agree that Yi Shiwen really is a legend, the next rising chief fiefin of Yi Yuan school. The disciples of Yi Yuan school were discussing among themselves, and this time, they weren't discussing the arrogance and overbearing attitude of the 8th prince. After all, they witnessed his terrifying strength in this stunning duel, which captured all their attention. However, while they were discussing, the duel became more and more intense and an astonishing collision occurred between the two. There's no point to this duel. All your resistance is futile since you are just a stepping stone and destined to become a pile of bones on the road to my success and glory. The 8th prince expressed his overbearing self-confidence in a loud voice. As soon his voice faded, 4 huge golden seals appeared out of nowhere and started spinning around him. At the same time, layer after layer of Zhen Yuan started surging up in the 8th prince's body. And as his Zhen Yuan was constantly bursting out of his body, these 4 huge golden seals instantly began to change shape. And in just a blink of an eye, huge beastly shadows appeared in the battlefield. Azure Dragon, Phoenix, White Tiger, Black Tortoise, these 4 god beasts instantly appeared in front of the 8th prince. Each of these beasts was huge, almost 100 feet tall and looked magnificent while positioned in complete defense formation in front of him as if pushing chock full. It seemed like in their presence, it would simply be impossible to approach the 8th prince. The 4 beast spirits, which transformed from the 4 huge golden seals, turned their heads towards the sky and began to roar fiercely. It seemed like their roars were shaking the entire world, as if the four sacred beasts had really descended from the heaven into this world. The eighth prince jumped onto the azure dragon's head and looked at Yishuan like an ancient god of war. He appeared indifferent, heartless, and incomparably formidable. And while standing on that azure dragon's head, he seemed like the commander of the heaven's dragon community. The disciples of Yi Yuan's school were suddenly panic-stricken. In fact, even the true disciples had their complexions fade instantly when the eighth prince's terrifying coercion suddenly swept off. Suddenly, in the depths of Yi Yuan's school, several tyrannical experts started talking to each other through soul search technique. Could it be that the eighth prince has obtained the heritage of the ancient four sacred beasts sect of the southeast region? For sacred beasts sect, are you talking about that mighty ancient sect that was rumored to have run amok in the ancient martial world, long back in the past? The four sacred beasts sect was able to accumulate over 1 million disciples and had outclassed all other rival sects in the southeast region, but later during the devil invasion, it was completely destroyed. Their headquarters also disintegrated and fell into the turbulent flow of space. So, this eighth prince managed to obtain the heritage of that ancient four sacred beasts sect? It should be true because I have read about the four sacred seals in some old antiquarian books. This is most likely the ancient martial technique of the great four sacred beasts sect. However, it's supposedly a top-tier martial arts technique, and I can see that the four beasts that have been summoned by the eighth prince are nothing like the real deal. The eighth prince must have used the blood of the demon beasts that contain the bloodline of the original four sacred beasts, but even so, this technique is very ominous. It seems like Yishuan is in big trouble. These four beasts are the guardian beasts between the heaven and earth. They are said to be the direct embodiment of the world laws. Now, while facing these four sacred beasts at once in this duel, he is going to fight at a great disadvantage. Don't forget, Yishuan is no fool, and he is certainly not an ordinary person. He is a fierce and formidable figure and will certainly have a way to deal with this situation. Yes, Yishuan is a rare genius of our Yi Yuan school. When he grows up, he will turn into the next chief fiefin of our sect. Not to mention, he is one of the 5 pro-disciples and one of the brilliant disciples of the younger generation of Great Yu State. Our head has personally announced support and protection to him, so you can put your mind at ease and relax. Let's wait and see how the battle unfolds. Yishuan, it appears that this eighth prince truly had a great and fortuitous adventure. Yimo's voice resounded in Yizaiwen's mind. I never expected him to summon the 4 sacred beasts. Is it that terrible? Yishuan asked. Of course, it's very powerful, and the genuine 4 sacred beasts are the supreme gods of heaven and earth. These beasts actually transcend the 3 realms and are said to be the masters of all 5 elements. There are legends about them in all of the 10,000 worlds, and especially in your human world. Yimo said, there are rumors that they were entrusted with the task of guarding the 10,000 worlds, and in each world, they take different avatars. And, all of the world laws between the heaven and the earth obey their command, granting them abnormally terrifying might, but fortunately, the 8th prince has summoned only their imitations. However, since these imitations have the features and powers of the original mythical beasts, it's going to be hard to deal with them. There was a sullen look on Yizaiwen's face. He knew from the outset that the 8th prince was a tough opponent. After all, his subordinate, Feng Kong, too, was such a difficult guy to deal with. However, he wasn't the slightest bit discouraged. Defeating stronger enemies to prove that his way was right, this had been his style all along. Anyway, he had already planned to sweep away any and all obstacles in his way and thereby pave the way to his destination, the peak of martial arts world. But, before he could obtain the full explanation from Yimo, the 8th prince made his move. The dragon beneath his feet instantly moved and rushed roaring towards Yishuan. The horrifying aura of the 4 sacred beast spirits suddenly burst forward and pressed down towards Yishuan. It seemed as if the 8th prince was the emperor of this world, like an omnipotent god, and right now, this god had directed all his might towards Yishuan. This was the might of terror which directly swept towards Yishuan. But at this time, Yishuan also made his move and poisonous dragon water control flag array instantly soared out and the terrifying figure of Deepwater Black Serpent King suddenly appeared and coiled around Yishuan. One could see dragon scales on its skin, the abnormally protruding four limbs, and the hook-like angled head. All of this was announcing that this Deepwater Black Snake King was about to evolve into a water dragon. Everyone gasped at this scene because they could clearly see that this beast was about to evolve into the realm of dragons, so horrifying. They could easily figure out that this beast used to be at the half-step legendary realm when it was alive, but it was then killed by Yishuan and its precious corpse fell into the hands of Yishuan, who then used it to upgrade his divine tool. This actually transformed the image of Yishuan in their hearts as that of a fearful expert. But only Yishuan knew that this Deepwater Black Snake King had been killed by the old man in black clothes. After being killed, its corpse fell into the hands of Yishuan and was completely absorbed by the poisonous dragon water control flag. It was needless to say how precious the corpse of a half-step legendary realm demon beast actually was. Needless to say, this beast was also the king of Deepwater Black Serpents. Hence, its corpse was an extremely precious treasure and could be used to refine powerful tools. But, in order to win Yizaiwan's support by giving respect and honor, the ninth prince handed over the corpse of the Deepwater Black Serpent King to Yishuan. In fact, not just that, he also gifted the corpses of thousands of other Deepwater Black Serpents to Yishuan. Yishuan offered the sacrifice of the corpses of these Deepwater Black Serpents to enhance the 18-surfaced poisonous dragon water control flag. In addition to that, he used the half-step legendary level corpse of the Deepwater Black Serpent King to form a new array to the flag. Whiz-whiz-whiz sound resounded several times, and from the side of Yishuan, several Deepwater Black Snakes flew out roaring from the poisonous dragon water control flag array. Looking at the mighty forms of these serpents, it seemed as if they were simply reborn because they had become much more formidable than before. Yishuan obtained the corpses of over 1,000 Deepwater Black Snakes and fed their souls to these original Deepwater Black Snakes, making them transform into such mighty beasts, but because of the limited time, these few snakes could just evolve to the peak of truth 5th stage. However, in doing so, almost 1/5 of the total 1,000 Deepwater Black Snakes were already consumed. This divine tool had not yet fully formed its battle efficiency as originally envisaged by Yishuan. After a complete feeding time and fully maturing, all sides of the 18-sided poisonous dragon water control flag array would take true shape, then at least, each side of the flag array would be able to reach the truth 9th stage, not to forget that one side of this flag array contained a half-step legendary realm beast soul. So, after successfully applying all the amendments to improve this flag array as he originally planned, the flag array would display its true might, and then with its help, Yishuan would be able to contend with the experts of half-step legendary realm. In other words, right now, this flag array was just a semi-finished product, but even so, Yishuan didn't have any other means to face the boundless might of the four sacred beasts. He could only bite the bullet and brace himself. One by one, the Deepwater Black Snakes rushed forward on the battlefield, and suddenly, numerous disciples were amazed at this scene. Some of them had previously witnessed Yizaiwan's flag array, but most of them had not seen such a magnificent divine tool. Chapter 214, 8th Prince's Fatal Error. At this time, there was a look of shock on the 8th Prince's face. He never thought that Yishuan would actually have such a hidden card. However, now he didn't have a way out of this situation. He must finish what he started and behead Yishuan, in order to save his reputation. On one side stood a large array of the four sacred beasts, namely the Azure Dragon, White Tiger, the Phoenix, and the Black Tortoise. While, on the other side stood the even bigger array of 19 gigantic Deepwater Black Snakes of poisonous dragon water control flag, and not to forget that one of them being the Deepwater Black Snake King. All the disciples had horrified expressions on their faces as they were anticipating an earth-shattering collision between these two peerless geniuses. Between the two of them, any of whom could be considered as an unimaginably tyrannical presence. The four sacred beasts and the gang of Deepwater Black Snakes severely collided. Boom! Giving rise to an inexhaustible air explosion and forming a large vacuum belt. It seemed as if the surrounding space had been shattered by this explosion. Both sides were submerged in the terrifying fluctuations of space and energy, while at the same time, the deep-water black snakes and the four sacred beast spirits fiercely rushed towards each other and clashed maliciously. The entire air was boiling as the fierce beastly roars continued to resound throughout the region. There was chaos everywhere while the surrounding space was slowly cracking and collapsing. It seemed just like the collapse of this entire world. The terrible scene scared everyone to death, as they could clearly see that this decisive battle was almost reaching its end. Roar! Roar! All kinds of horrifying beastly roars were directly impacting the clouds in the sky and shaking the atmosphere. This was truly a fight between ominous beasts, which was actually able to shake the heaven and the earth. Clang! Eighth Prince's spear was once again wrapped in a terrifying light. The dragon beneath his feet began to roar loudly, as he again advanced towards Yishuan. The energy surrounding the spear started getting bigger and fell towards Yishuan. It seemed as if a mountain was collapsing upon him. The spear packed an invincible might, to the extent that it simply punctured through the atmosphere and spread chaos everywhere. This scene was literally like the birth of the world. There was a calm look on Yizaiwen's face. He didn't say anything, he was very calm. Irrespective of the kind of attacks enemy was throwing at him, there was no way to shake his confidence. Yishuan shot his long blade, releasing an equally fearful attack, in the form of blade light, towards the incoming attack. Yizaiwen's blade attacks were extremely horrifying, to the extent that each of his blade attacks was capable of cutting open through the space. Boom! 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 The two experts collided again, but this time, they staggered away from each other. In a flash, the flesh and blood flew in all directions. The disciples felt their hearts tremble. Who was hurt? Whose blood was this? Yuan School's disciples were naturally hoping that Yishuan was okay, that it wasn't him who got hurt. As the light dispersed, everyone saw the eighth prince's figure, standing atop the azure dragon. They were shocked to find that his whole arm was almost torn off by Yizaiwen's long blade, and the blood was constantly dripping down his arm. No one expected that Yishuan would actually turn out to be so formidable that he would manage to almost chop off the eighth prince's arm. After seeing the eighth prince's blood flying in front of their eyes, everyone was stunned. There was pin-drop silence on the battlefield. The eighth prince almost fell off the azure dragon's head. Could it be that the eighth prince was not a match of Yishuan in a same-level duel? No, in fact, Yishuan was only an expert of truth 4th stage and his enemy was an expert of much higher level. This in itself was not a fair fight, but even so, the duel should have been in favor of the eighth prince. In the end, what was the true extent of Yizaiwen's strength? You actually dared to hurt me, now no one can save you from my wrath. The eighth prince's body suddenly exuded a strange godly aura, and soon, the wound on his arm gradually began to heal, was no longer bleeding like earlier. There was a very simple reason behind why the bleeding suddenly stopped. It was because Yizaiwen's Daoqi was still lingering in his wound and was constantly devouring his wounds, so this was the fundamental reason why he could not recover. Just now, the strange godly aura instantly expelled Yizaiwen's Daoqi and allowed the bleeding to stop. Yishuan sneered but didn't say anything, just looked coldly at the eighth prince. The eighth prince grinned cruelly while he was standing on the azure dragon's head and holding a spear in one hand. And suddenly, he rushed towards Yishuan. The spear in the eighth prince's hand began to produce buzzing noise and instantly evolved into a huge cage of energy, which then went towards Yishuan in order to suppress him and choke him to death. Yishuan didn't waste any time, just rushed forward and waved the long blade in his hand, thereby releasing 9 blade shadows, which then fiercely collided with the spear attack in the sky. Boom! The two attacks glittered as they severely collided and suddenly began to exude terrifying rays of light in the sky. Puchi! The spear left a fatal wound on Yizaiwen's waist, inducing a deadly trail of blood across his waist. This was the first time Yishuan got injured in this duel, but the eighth prince was in a worse state. A horrible wound had opened up on his chest and the blood was crazily oozing out of it. What's going on? That eighth prince actually fell under the wind. How is this possible? how can this Yishuan be so formidable? Several disciples exclaimed while there was shock and surprise on their faces. Although they always thought of the 8th prince as an arrogant and annoying guy, but deep in their hearts, they could still not deny his overwhelming might. Although they did not want to admit it, but the powerful image of the 8th prince was deeply rooted in their hearts, so they never thought that he would actually fall under the wind. The scene that unfolded in front of their eyes was simply beyond their original expectation. This was an unprecedented matter. Not even the 8th prince himself ever imagined such an outcome. Since his debut and the beginning of his so-called world conquest, he had never fallen under the wind in a same-level duel, not to mention he had never fought such a one-sided battle. Not to forget, he was the one who instigated this duel and still ended up falling under the wind. This was just too ridiculous and unexpected. In fact, he was not unaware that he made a blunder of underestimating Yishuan and fell into his own trap. He could sense intense threat from Yishuan. He was aware of the fact that Yishuan was so young and still managed to kill Feng Kong, who was clearly at a higher level. It was obvious that Yishuan was capable of fighting with experts of higher level, but he just never expected that Yishuan would turn out to be so terrifying. Despite being at a fairly higher level, he had been completely suppressed by Yishuan. Suddenly, an ominous and dense aura manifested around Yishuan. He didn't wait for the 8th prince to recover and attacked, but this time, he didn't use an ordinary blade skill. What he used was actually a horrifying sword intention, which instantly swept across and completely engulfed everything in the surroundings. Looking at the overwhelming might of this sword intention, no one could guess the rank of this skill. Immediately, the entire expanse of the sky was engulfed in the brilliance of this sword intention, whereas the nearby mountains couldn't stand its presence and disintegrated to bits. Everyone had a feeling in their hearts that if anyone tried to stand in its way, they would be instantly obliterated, leaving nothing behind. 8th prince's complexion suddenly paled. This was the first time such a terrified expression appeared on his face, other than the usual ice-cold expression. He cursed in his heart and thought that this Yishuan was not playing by the rules and suddenly shot the sword intention, carrying such an out-of-the-world destructive power. Moreover, he could sense that there was an inherent meaning of creative concept hidden inside the sword intention, but the 8th prince couldn't understand how Yishuan managed to practice it to such a profound level that it so effortlessly smashed his spirit illusions. This attack was extremely fearful and was virtually impossible to guard against. Yishuan so casually switched from using blade-based attacks to using a sword skill to catch his enemy off guard. He carefully waited for the right moment to unleash the sword intention, a strange but deadly skill he picked up from that fearful swordsman. And right then, Yishuan finally decided to go all out and fully unleashed his long-trained combat style. Blade Light. Sword Intention. Palm Shadow. One after another, Yishuan was unleashing various techniques and skill without any rules and patterns, totally random. As if all of these skills were on his fingertips and invoking them was a child's play for him. This clearly showed that he had a very high-level understanding of the martial arts when compared to his peers. Gradually, the 8th prince was completely pressed under the wind. Needless to say, no matter how high level he was at before the seal was placed on him, but right now, the best he could do was display the might of small truth at best. And when considering the level of understanding of martial arts, who could possibly beat Yishuan? So long as it was at the same level, no one could contend with Yishuan. Not to forget, when Yishuan was at Truth 3rd stage, he was able to compete with the experts of small Truth level. And now that he stepped into the Truth 4th stage, he should possess enough battle efficiency to beat any and all experts of small Truth level. Of course, 8th prince was just too tyrannical, and that's how he managed to survive this long in the duel. Otherwise, any other expert would have been slaughtered in one shot by Yishuan. Being able to last so long against Yishuan, the 8th prince certainly proved his well-deserved reputation. Of course, only Yishuan and Yimo would think so. Everyone else was simply dumbfounded to witness that Yishuan was prevailing in the duel. But now, the battle had thoroughly fallen into the hands of Yishuan, and it was time to end this once and forever. Choosing to fight Yishuan at the small truth level was really the biggest mistake committed by the so-called perfectionist, the 8th prince. 8th prince, your legend ends today. Your decision to fight me at the same level was the biggest mistake you'll ever make. Yi Shiwen gave out a loud shout and a burst of energy broke out of his body. Chapter 215, Eighth Prince defeated. Perhaps if the Eighth Prince was in his peak condition, he might have been able to kill Yi Shiwen, but it just so happened that he was too conceited and made a fatal error of challenging Yi Shiwen to the same level duel. Everyone was anxious at this moment. They were fully aware of the extraordinary prowess of these two experts, and the fact that both were capable of effortlessly beating any expert of Small Truth Realm, but at this time, the young among the two was able to completely suppress the other. But, I was so sure of your death. The Eighth Prince said with an unwilling look on his face. He was cursing himself for committing his biggest mistake. Rather than blaming himself for being so conceited, he was feeling pain in his heart for facing such a miserable situation. Conquest between peerless experts of each generation was always an extremely cruel occurring, and everyone knew that, but in every generation, there were always few experts who were able to reach the summit of the conquest, and later in life, they would also come to control several major forces. If only these two could have avoided this duel, at least in few decades, they would have certainly obtained influential positions in the major forces of Great Yu State. But, the duel took place ahead of time. Yi Ziwen's battle strength was too terrifying and he easily managed to suppress the Eighth Prince. Eighth Prince's spear possessed tremendous might. Each of its strikes was capable of shattering the space. It seemed to be releasing a tyrannical chi which was as if coming straight from the grasp of the kind of the world. And each blade attack of Yi Shiwen seemed to be cutting open the world itself and breaking the entire universe. While they were fighting and clashing with each other, it would appear like a terrible collision between two planets, leaving the horrifying aftermath of the explosion everywhere. And with each collision, the enchantment barrier would almost collapse by shattering into several pieces and dispersing. The disciples held their breaths as these scenes of terror continued to unfold in front of their eyes. These two men were undoubtedly the supreme leaders of the younger generation. Especially, the true disciples were simply frustrated to death after witnessing such a scene. Of course, they were among the elite geniuses of Yi Yuan School, but when compared with the two peerless geniuses fighting in front of their eyes, their own accomplishments were nothing. They had the kind of feeling their hair fall off to the ground while thinking about the shame they felt for not having the capability to carry on such a fight. After all, their strength was far worse. This in itself was not necessarily going to determine the winner of the conquest, as long as the vast majority of peers could be beheaded, and in that case, the battle between these two could have been avoided. However, now the fight was close to the end. And since the Eighth Prince's ambition was to dominate the world, he actually needed to destroy all obstacles with his own hands. Ah! The Eighth Prince looked up towards the sky and gave out a long and loud battle cry. And at the same time, a terrifying burst of monstrous energy rushed throughout the spear in his hand. Eight Prince's previous heroic aura had disappeared and only a boundless killing aura remained in its place. His tall stature appeared quite domineering, just like a huge mountain, when he suddenly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. However, he still couldn't injure Yi Shiwen. In fact, his attack was easily blocked. The Eighth Prince was incomparably overbearing, to the extent that even though he had been fully suppressed by Yi Shiwen in the duel, he still didn't switch to defensive play and kept on going all out. An example of infinite courage. The duel is reaching its end so soon. I never expected that the dignified Eighth Prince would be so close to facing a disastrous defeat. It's strange, Yi Shiwen is too strong, and witnessing his performance in this duel, he is certainly worthy of the title of Yi Yuan School's fifth prodisciple. The Eighth Prince really had it coming. He actually wanted to use Yi Shiwen as his stepping stone in his world quest. Even if our head declared his full support and protection of Yi Shiwen, he still dared to pull off such a stunt. This clearly shows that he looks down on us. All of the disciples felt that this duel's outcome would be out any minute. Yi Ziwen's facial expression looked even more callous while the blade light completely quelled the Eighth Prince. Ah! Eighth Prince roared again and again, and suddenly shot his spear, which stabbed towards Yi Shiwen like an endlessly falling mountain. The approaching flying spear looked dazzling and colorful, just like a small sun. Look at yourself, now you are nothing but a cornered beast. Yi Xuan roared and shot his palm, which then turned into a coiling dragon and flew towards the incoming spear. Boom! The resulting horrifying blast even obliterated the atoms in the atmosphere. The eighth prince's spear collided with Yi Ziwen's dragon claw and stagnated, it simply couldn't advance. Yi Ziwen's both hands turned into coiling dragons and soared towards the sky, like two god beasts, suppressing and obliterating everything in the surroundings. Eighth prince's face finally revealed a look of panic and terror. In so many years of his life, he had never been suppressed so thoroughly by anyone. Now that he was facing Yi Xuan, he was just like a cornered beast. No matter how much he tried, it was still extremely difficult for him to escape from Yi Ziwen's attacks. Yi Ziwen's palm turned into a coiling dragon, which swept its huge tail towards the eighth prince. He used the strongest move of coiling dragon palm, divine dragon swings its tail. Eighth prince was sent flying several hundred miles away, along with the spear, and finally fell on the ground. No one knew how many bones shattered in his body, his clothes were tattered, his hair scattered in all directions. He no longer looked like the heroic prince he was when he arrived earlier, now he was just a miserable-looking warrior who was on the verge of losing everything he accumulated so far in his life. But the duel was not over yet. Before the eighth prince could take a breath of relief, a spear came piercing across the sky and stabbed into his body. Eighth prince was simply not prepared for this and was directly pierced by the spear. Boom! The eighth prince was punched on top of a mountain peak by his own spear, and suddenly, the entire peak was cut off in half by the inconceivable might of the spear. The eighth prince was still struggling, roaring again and again. 1/3 of the mountain had already been smashed by the enormous might of the spear, but then suddenly, the fearful seal on the spear tip started to glow intermittently and instantly activated, thereby completely sealing off the prince's strength. Yi Xuan flew across the sky and landed next to the pale-looking eighth prince, then said, "As pathetic as you are right now, do you still want to kill me? I told you, in a same-level battle, I will squash you like a bug. I dare you to fight a fair battle with me. Since my real strength was sealed by your elder, I couldn't show my complete strength." The eighth prince clamored, while there was still a murderous look in his eyes, but not so intense like earlier. "Fair, you say? How ridiculous. You are far above my level, but you still rushed here to kill me. Now you want a fair duel?" Yi Xuan said in a ridiculing manner. The eighth prince was furious, but he couldn't do anything. Right now, his martial arts and skill had been sealed by his own spear and he couldn't even move. "So now you can stop going on expeditions. Maybe try next time, in your next life," Yi Xuan said, and the long blade instantly danced in his hand. The surrounding disciples immediately exclaimed and started celebrating. Yi Xuan finally defeated the eighth prince and saved their face. And this was simply beyond anyone's expectation. However, if he killed the eighth prince, then it would create a huge sensation throughout the Great Yu state. After defeating the eighth prince, the one who actually intended to dominate the entire Great Yu state, it was obvious that Yi Xuan was going to become very famous. "I refuse to accept this outcome," the eighth prince suddenly shouted, and this time, there was fear in his eyes. He was scared of Yi Xuan since he had never bumped into a tyrannical expert like him. Yi Xuan was just like an indomitable person, a truly fearful and bizarre existence, and the eighth prince finally realized it. "Stop!" A loud shout transmitted from far away, and suddenly, a big hand opened a crack in the space and stretched towards the eighth prince. Yi Xuan frowned. How could he possibly forget the terrifying expert who arrived along with the eighth prince? Yi Xuan immediately seized the eighth prince's body and threw across the sky. The eighth prince's body was sent flying at an extremely fast speed and it escaped from the reach of that big hand. "What do you want?" Yi Xuan said coldly and looked towards the void. "Young man, this duel is over," that hoarse voice said. A skinny old man's figure suddenly appeared from the void. "Duel, you say? You think this was really just a duel?" Yi Xuan sneered and said. "This time you've won, just respect the rule of so-called forgive and forget. The royal clan will owe you one." The old man said. Humph, what will I do with a royal favor? Do you think it's good enough to stand on level with this matter? Yi Shiwen said in a strict voice. To others, perhaps royal favor was heavy as a mountain, but the same didn't apply to Yi Shiwen. His origin was extraordinary. He had come from a much advanced world with advanced societies, where the hierarchical system of monarchy was already a long-gone tradition. He rushed here to kill me. There was killing intention filled in his heart when he challenged me to the duel. In fact, he even said that he would take my life today. And you say that this was just a duel? Yi Shiwen said disdainfully. If he had won, would you show up to stop him from killing me? If I hadn't defeated him today, he and his spear would have taken so many innocent lives of countless geniuses. Would you persuade him to stop and convince him otherwise? No, all you can do is teach me a lesson on forgive and forget. In the end, you just follow double standards. You treat yourself and others based on two different sets of standards. Look, Yi Shiwen, the road ahead is long. Even if you possess God-given wisdom and talent, but you are still young and far from being a legend warrior. There's a long way to go and you will face countless unknown obstacles along the way, so making a new friend is good for you. A hint of threat was apparent in the old man's words. Chapter 216, Demon Island Bell Rings. Look, Yi Shiwen, the road ahead is long. Even if you possess God-given wisdom and talent, but you are still young and far from being a legend warrior. There's a long way to go and you will face countless unknown obstacles along the way, so making a new friend is good for you. A hint of threat was apparent in the old man's words. Are you threatening me? Yi Ziwen's complexion suddenly became dark and filled with anger. I am just stating the fact, kid. The old man said in a casual manner. I don't need others to help me pave my way to success. Even if there are thorns in my way, I will completely chop them off and make my own way. Yi Shiwen was unmoved. He was standing in front of Yi Yuan's school and wasn't afraid of the enemy. Yi Shiwen consecrated to the unusual repugnance towards the royal clan. Earlier when the 8th prince was challenging him to a fight to the death, this old man said that the elders mustn't get involved in the fight of the young ones. And now that his own disciple's life was on the line, he interfered without thinking twice about his own statement. Two sets of standards were pretty obvious in this situation. I remember how you said just now that the old guys mustn't get involved in the matters of the younger generation. Now, you intend to go back on your words. Yi Shiwen said in a mocking voice. If I was the one nailed atop a mountain, would you come out to save me from your 8th prince? Look at the pious look on your face and the dignity you carry as an expert, it's fake in the end. You are not even ashamed of yourself, old man. You. The old man choked from the anger, bulging inside of him from Yi Ziwen's words, but he didn't dare to attack. After all, he was standing in front of Yi Yuan's school. If he actually dared to attack Yi Shiwen, neither him nor the 8th prince would go back alive. Not to forget, the 8th prince's entire stunt was like provocation, as if looking down on Yi Yuan's school. The 5 forces were capable of peaceful coexistence for so many years, naturally by not making sudden moves and abiding by the rules, and the 8th prince's everyday's clamoring about dominating the world itself was no different from committing the taboo. Who would want the 8th prince in power? One could simply and smoothly kill the 8th prince on this reason conveniently and no one would be able to say anything. Not to mention, the royal clan wouldn't say anything. In fact, many people would be clapping and celebrating. The competition in royal clan was more brutal than other forces. Although the 5 pro-disciples were competing for the seat of Yi Yuan school's head, but they wouldn't stoop so low as to killing each other for its sake, because it was just a position and didn't give the right to continue one's own royal bloodline. However, the same was not true for the throne. 8th prince's death would greatly benefit the eldest prince, the 2nd prince, the 4th prince, and now the 9th prince was also in the race. Not to mention, other major forces were supporting the aforementioned princes and they certainly didn't approve of the 8th prince's ambition. So, even inside the royal clan, there were many people who didn't approve of the 8th prince's actions. After all, they didn't want to mess with the other major forces. Since they were fully aware of the fact that royal clan alone wasn't responsible for the foundation of Great Yu State, in fact, without the help of other forces, it would have been impossible for the royal clan to achieve such a feat. Many people were scared that if the 8th prince really got the throne and waged war against the other forces, the end result would be the destruction of royal clan. The overall strength of Yi Yuan school and the other major forces was tyrannical. They possessed several legendary-level experts, and while facing so many legendary-level experts, the imperial legions would prove pretty useless. Since the rule of strength in number didn't stand a chance in front of a legendary-level expert. Because of this, the royal clan was deliberately planning to keep strong ties with Yunqing sect. By doing so, it was barely maintaining a balance of power with Yi Yuan school and the other two major forces. Even if he wanted to dominate the world, he shouldn't have kept blabbering about it all the time. Fear controls all and people instinctively fear unknown. Therefore, considering the hostile elements inside the royal clan who hated the 8th prince, the old man didn't dare to get involved. I am not the kind of person who easily gets scared of such empty threats. I just believe in fully repay of debt. Yi Shiwen sneered, and it seems today, it's going to be difficult for your 8th prince to escape from the death's claws. Yi Shiwen lifted his long blade and was about to stab the 8th prince, and from the far distance, the old man's angry shout suddenly thundered. Ding! The melodious sound of a bell suddenly rang out of nowhere, as if transmitting from the sky, and instantly struck Yi Ziwen's mind. Yi Shiwen was completely left stunned for an instant. Ding! 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 One after another, the bell continued to ring. The old man looked at Yi Shiwen and couldn't understand what stunned him, but he saw the opportunity and immediately grabbed the 8th prince's body in his big hand and disappeared. You will pay for what you did today. Yi Shiwen, what's wrong? Wasn't he going to kill the 8th prince? Impossible, I can just feel Yi Ziwen's monstrous killing intention and anger. I don't understand why he didn't kill him while he had the chance. Then what happened exactly? God knows. Could it be that something happened and stopped Yi Ziwen's attack? Moments after the 8th prince was rescued by the old man, Yi Shiwen finally recovered and got extremely furious. However, what on the earth was that bell sound and where did it come from? The news quickly spread throughout the Great Yu State among the warriors' community. After a long period of 50 years, the Demon Island bell rang once again in the sky of Great Yu State. There were lots of legends related to the Demon Island in Great Yu State and several neighboring countries. The older experts were not much concerned about the Demon Island because, more or less, everyone knew about this strange island's connection with the younger generation disciples. Since the Demon Island only appeared once in every 50 years, and for an average person, it was a considerably long time. Naturally, no one knew about the background of the Demon Island. However, very soon, the legend of the Demon Island spread once again. According to the hearsay, long time ago, the Demon Island appeared in this world. There was no record of how long ago it really appeared, but after a cycle of every 50 years, it would appear in the East China Sea. Again, no one knew about the reason behind its appearance and disappearance and how it happened. Everyone knew only this much, that it would appear only once in 50 years, and each time with its appearance, a melodious bell would ring and call forth the chosen ones. Not anyone could listen to this bell's sound, because only the leaders of younger generation could hear the melodious sound of this bell, and only these chosen few could enter into the island. Those who couldn't hear the bell's summons shouldn't even dream about going to the Demon Island. Therefore, many people considered the bell's summon as a standard. Those who heard the bell ringing were considered as young heroes of their respective sections. 50 years ago, Qi Fifan went to the Demon Island and reaped great benefits over there. That's how he could become so strong. And after a lapse of 5 decades, the Demon Island once again rang the bell, which gave rise to countless rumors. And like last time, this time, Yi Shiwen heard the call of the bell, which also became a staple of conversation for countless people. After receiving the summons from the Demon Island, finally, even the unwilling and most stubborn people had to recognize Yi Ziwen's peerless talent and extraordinary abilities. This was no different from attaining instant glory overnight. since the Demon Island Bell never summoned non-top geniuses. However, Yi Shiwen was not much excited or flattered about this, like everyone expected him to be. In fact, this thing was too weird since Yi Shiwen didn't know about the origin of this Demon Island. After continuously searching through books and materials for a few days, Yi Shiwen finally had a profound understanding about this Demon Island and why it was famed as the killing fields of peerless geniuses. The Demon Island Bell Summon was not just for Yi Yuan School, but for 10 countries of the Southeast region. Almost over 1,000 peerless geniuses from the 10 countries of the Southeast region were going to participate in this expedition. No one could count how many peerless geniuses fell during the last summons. Qi Fifan himself was an invincible expert of his generation and incomparably tyrannical, and largely because most of the peerless geniuses of his generation had already fallen in the Demon Island. 50 years ago, that time was one of the most miserable times for the Great Yu State. It lost more than 50 peerless geniuses in one fell swoop, and in the end, only Qi Fifan survived and returned from the Demon Island. In the end, what happened there, no one would ever come to know except Qi Fifan. However, even if the situation was relatively good, as many as only a dozen people would manage to come back alive. And one must know that these weren't some ordinary disciples, but were considered the specifically cultivated peerless geniuses of various forces. The death of any of which would cause severe loss to the sect. It was said in the southeast region that only those who would manage to come back alive from the Demon Island would be standing on the top of the pyramid of power. Therefore, although the Demon Island was called an elite meat grinder, but it still gave enormous opportunities to the brave young geniuses. That's why even after clearly knowing about the narrow escape, they would still choose to go. Several of them wanted to go because they were holding the thought, they would either die on the Demon Island or come back alive to become the strongest figures among the 10 countries of the Southeast region. Moreover, these were the so-called elites among the geniuses and possessed great self-confidence. Every one of them was confident that they would be able to come out alive from the Demon Island. Anyways, there was a huge gap between the strength and skills of those who didn't go to the Demon Island and those who came out from there. So they were willing to take the fall and make good use of this chance. Now it was Yi Ziwen's turn to choose whether to go or not. I will go, why wouldn't I go when everyone else is going? And if only one person will come out alive from there, that person would be me. Chapter 217, The Sinister Demon Island. The Demon Island appeared again and immediately set off a storm in the entire southeast region. The infamous bell once again summoned countless geniuses from all over, and they set off on the journey. This expedition was only focused on preparing a battlefield for the chosen geniuses hailing from the 10 countries of Southeast region. Brave and fearless, but the success was going to belong to only a few, the rest could only be used as paving stones in the supreme glory of the winners. Although it wasn't clear at what time they must go to the Demon Island, but under normal circumstances, the major forces would come along and send their respective chosen geniuses together, so that they could get along on the way and take good care of each other. And this time, 3 disciples were summoned from Yi Yuan School. No one was surprised to find out that one of the chosen candidates was Yi Shiwen, while the other one of the remaining 2 was actually Hua Menghan. In the last 2 months, Hua Menghan had firmly stepped into the second stage of Truth Realm, and her cultivation was surprisingly almost comparable to that of Yi Shiwen. After all, Hua Menghan had spent a long time in Xiantian 9th stage, accumulating all the time, so now when she finally had a breakthrough, she directly reached the second stage of Truth Realm. Initially, Yi Shiwen was a bit surprised, but he knew that she had a strong background. He actually felt quite relieved, since Hua Menghan joined the main sect of Yi Yuan School at the age of 16 and that too when she was at Xiantian 5th stage. And, noticing her excellent talent and shocking cultivation speed, later, she was taken in as a direct disciple of Wu Patian, the head of Yi Yuan School. Now, in just a matter of few years, she reached all the way up to the Truth second stage. This really put her in a league, far ahead of her peers and sibling disciples. Hua Menghan had been considerable low-key all the time since she was focusing on the accumulation of profound knowledge and skill, and now that her cultivation finally had a breakthrough, it literally put her in the spotlight as a peerless genius of Yi Yuan School. Not to forget, she was one of the 3 chosen by the Demon Island Bell. Hua Menghan's achievement could be regarded as extraordinary, literally far beyond the expectations of Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Shiwen was much more curious about the 3rd candidate. He was a young guy in black clothes who appeared to be about 20 years old. Named as Chen Ruochen, he was a sibling disciple of Hua Menghan and had been directly trained by Wu Padian. He was a disciple of Truth 3rd stage and was actually not really a well-known disciple among Wu Potion's disciples. He could only be regarded as very mediocre, with a normally silent and withdrawn personality. He was basically a loner and didn't have many friends. In fact, even Hua Menghan didn't know him well because of his eccentric attitude. Even though Chen Ruochen was not very famous, but Yi Shiwen didn't dare to look down on him. After all, only peerless geniuses could hear the summoning bell of the Demon Island, so it was impossible for mediocre geniuses to be summoned. Perhaps, he was deliberately trying to keep a low profile. But anyway, a total of 3 disciples from Yi Yuan School were going to set foot on the Demon Island. So, they would obviously maintain a good relationship with each other. After all, mutual cooperation was not always wrong. Because everyone needed to prepare for the long journey ahead, so their departure was delayed until 10 days later, when the 3 finally hit the road. Although each time the Demon Island made its appearance, it was always in the East China Sea, but the location was not the same each time. Besides the experts who heard the summoning bell, others couldn't sense its location. However, to actually find its exact location was not very difficult because thousands of experts were summoned each time, making the task easier. Not to forget, even the non-summoned experts of the same sect would help their chosen peers in finding the Demon Island. However, it was impossible for the non-chosen ones to enter the island. Yi Shiwen and the other 2 flew all the way towards the Demon Island and saw a lot of people on the way. They were also flying in the direction of the East China Sea, where the Demon Island was going to appear after 50 years. Among them, there were many people who didn't believe in this legend and wanted to confirm with their own eyes. Along the way, the 3 didn't have much communication until they reached the East China Sea coast. They started looking for a Zhen Yuan-propelled wooden boat. Yi Shiwen noticed that this boat was way faster than the speedboat of his previous life. The trio had an approximate location of the Demon Island, so they decided to advance in that direction. Although flying would be faster than riding that boar, but airspace near the Demon Island was said to be infested with tyrannical flying-type demon beasts, so it was recommended to use a boat. Even though the trio was somewhat dissatisfied with the speed, but they didn't want to take the lead and definitely weren't in a rush. On the way, occasionally, small groups of 3 to 4 experts could be seen rushing towards the Demon Island team. Obviously, they were the leaders of the younger generation among the 10 countries of Southeast region. Early morning sunlight was reflecting on the sea in the form of shiny bits and pieces of dazzling stars. The whole scene looked extremely beautiful as the trio sped on the boat for 3 whole days, but there wasn't a shred of weariness on their faces. Having reached such higher levels of cultivation, there was no necessity of taking rest. From far, they saw a figure approaching very fast from behind and were actually surprised to see that it was a young priest in black robe. He looked roughly 25 or 26 years old from appeared. His robe was fluttering as he was riding the waves and quickly approaching them. His movements looked natural and elegant. The trio was slightly surprised since they never expected to actually see a priest in the world of martial arts. Yi Shiwen could somehow relate to this from the knowledge of his past life since the priest somewhat resembled the monastic martial artists from his previous life. However, there were some differences, like the spiritual cultivation involved training one's mind and soul, but this priest seemed to have a very powerful martial arts heritage. This young priest's agility skill was extremely superior. It didn't take him even a moment to arrive beside these 3. But he didn't wait to converse with the trio and quickly went ahead. He just stopped for an instant and nodded slightly to greet the 3, which showed that he was not an arrogant guy. Hua Menghan frowned while looking at the back profile of the young priest and said, "This priest looks very strong. I could not perceive his cultivation." Chen Ruochen nodded in agreement. This priest was actually daring to go alone to the Demon Island, which was the proof of his incredible courage. There was a calm and dignified look on Yi Zaiwen's face, because unlike the other two, he was well aware of this priest's outstanding strength. He had already seen through the cultivation of the young priest, who was at the 6th stage of Truth Realm. This should clearly place him among the few strongest peerless geniuses on the Demon Island. He was so young and still managed to step into the Truth 6th stage, which was a proof of his natural talent. Needless to say, since the Demon Island appeared only once in 50 years, plus it summoned only special geniuses who were generally only 50 years old or less, each having great potential genius. So, Yi Shiwen could determine from this that this priest was definitely less than 50 years old. In fact, he looked less than 30 years old, which again placed him among the rarest of peerless geniuses like the 8th prince. Fortunately, the test on the Demon Island was not to determine one winner out of so many contestants. It was more of a treasure hunt. However, the slaughter was inevitable whenever a rare treasure would pop up. Demon Island has been able to attract so many people, all kinds of adventures that Demon Island, there are many day material to treasure, turn around, you can have great benefits. The main attraction of the Demon Island was it being a host of several rare treasures and adventures. Most people were attracted towards the endless treasures and craze for the upcoming fortuitous encounters. In a blink of an eye, 2 days passed. Yi Shiwen and the other two finally approached the Demon Island. The excitement was getting more and more intense in their hearts, as they were nearing the dyed black sky, filled with dark billowing clouds. The strong winds were howling, numerous sea waves were billowing and shooting up into the sky, but in this boundless sea, they could still see the blossoming of small waves. When looking from afar, there was an endless sea stretched for miles and obscured by dark clouds. The trio was enjoying beautiful sunlight earlier, but now they were in the deeper region of this sea. Here, dense dark clouds were running amok, obscuring the sky, and a huge island could be seen looming in the stormy waves of Yaoqi, soaring throughout the sky. The trio knew that this dark cloud was actually composed of Yaoqi, and within a month, the entire Demon Island was going to be sealed off by a barricade of these dark clouds. It would not reopen until more than a year later, which meant that they would be sealed off on this island for a whole year until it would reopen. In more than a year's time, the people on the Demon Island wouldn't be able to contact with the people outside and vice versa. Under these dark clouds, there was a no-fly zone for any living or non-living thing of alien origin. The trio quickly sped the boat towards the island, while the dark clouds were directly above them, but suddenly from afar, they saw few human figures coming towards them and were shocked to find out that each of them possessed tyrannical aura. Judging from their auras, it was certain that they were legendary level experts. Finally, the trio saw 3 old men dressed in magnificent robes, as if they were the super heavyweights of some big faction. However, these 3 old men looked extremely distressed. Their robes were ragged and torn all over, as if they were desperately fleeing from someone or something. There wasn't a shred of imposing aura coming from them, as the trio expected from legendary level experts. Roar! A loud roar of unknown origins pierced through the sea breeze and shook Yi Zaiwen's eardrums. It left his ears buzzing and slightly bleeding, which caused him to feel nausea and sick. Yi Shiwen looked in the direction of the sound's origin and saw a huge golden light flying across the sky. Even in the dark and gloomy sky, it looked extraordinarily bright and dazzling. In a matter of few breaths, the golden light arrived close by and dispersed into golden fragments of light, revealing a gigantic golden eagle. Its entire body was covered in yellow feathers that were exuding golden light. It also had a curved black beak and a pair of extremely large yellow claws. Chapter 218, Great Ominous Mountain, Roar. The huge golden eagle gave out a loud shriek and fled all the way towards the 3 legendary experts. It was extremely fast and arrived in front of them in a blink of an eye, and stretched out its huge claws. "Back off, you filthy beast!" One of the 3 old men swayed from side to side to barely avoid the deadly claws. He immediately flew above the golden eagle's head and instantly unleashed his terrifying powers, shooting numerous water arrows towards the golden eagle. The great golden eagle shrieked in a loud voice, instantly lifted its golden wings upward, and in a flash, the innumerable golden feathers on its wings started to glow with golden light. Its golden wings seemed all prepared to welcome the incoming water arrows from above. Boom! 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 The innumerable blue-colored water arrows and dazzling golden feathers scattered everywhere and covered up most of the visible sky. It seemed as if the ambience of the world itself had changed in an instant. The gigantic explosion as if churned the ocean, setting off tremors and ocean waves in all directions. Yi Xuan immediately dived into the sea when he saw several meters high sea waves coming towards him, along with the aftershock of the explosion. The terrifying might present in the aftershock pushed all three of them in random directions into the sea, while their boat was directly shattered to bits. Yi Xuan took a direct hit and the huge impact almost made him lose consciousness, but he knew that if he fainted in this damned place then there would be no saving him. This golden eagle was extremely tyrannical and was literally chasing around legendary-level experts as if it was chasing stray dogs. In the end, it was hard to imagine its rank and the level of its cultivation. Yi Xuan was cursing these old men in his heart. If they knew that they wouldn't be able to escape from the golden eagle, then what did they mess with it in the first place? Each time the two sides clashed, it caused a blast so potent that it seemed to have been caused as a result of collision between celestial bodies. The whole sea was boiling and literally burning to the point of vaporizing as a result of terrifying attacks, derived from the fluctuations in the world principles. These fluctuations in world laws were morphing everything on the scene, and Yi Xuan felt intense pressure which began to suffocate him on the spot. The protective layer of Zhen Yuan on Yi Zaiwen's body was instantly neutralized by the aftermath of the battle, even though it was taking place about 1 li away from there. The terrifying fluctuations in the world laws were almost about to crush Yi Xuan to death. Tianyuan Mirror. Yi Xuan gave out a loud shout and Tianyuan Mirror instantly flew out from his body and irradiated rays of scarlet light, forming a protective curtain around him. Only after this, Yi Xuan finally relaxed and felt a little better. At this time, he looked all around but couldn't find Chen Ruochen and Hua Menghan. Ah! Then, suddenly, Yi Xuan heard a desperate cry and looked up, only to see that the old experts had been firmly clutched in the claws of that golden eagle. Their bodies had been pierced by the horrifying claws and the blood was endlessly streaming out from their wounds. A bone-chilling sea breeze blew and the entire area was filled with the smell of blood. How could they possibly survive after being clutched in the fearful claws of that golden eagle? They struggled for a while but ultimately died. The golden eagle roared and seemed quite self-satisfied. While still clutching the corpses of the three old men, it immediately flapped its wings and soon disappeared into the horizon, leaving a long trace of golden light across the sky. When the golden eagle disappeared from there, the sea finally calmed down, although still turbulent because of the usual rough waves, but when compared with the dreadful waves from a while ago, it seemed quite tranquil. After witnessing this scene, Yi Xuan suddenly recalled reading about a mysterious bird in the myths and legends. This magical bird was called Golden-Winged Eagle, a legendary giant bird which was famous for taking dragons as its food. He only considered it a ridiculous legend initially, but after witnessing the legendary Golden-Winged Eagle with his own eyes, he couldn't help but held his breath. To think a mythical bird from ancient fables was actually living on this island. This demon island was extremely dangerous, just like a wild forest from ancient times. Not to mention, it was a host to bad weather and all kinds of unusual demon beasts. Yi Xuan searched for Hua Menghan and Chen Ruochen for a while, but couldn't even find a trace of the two. He could only give up and advanced towards the demon island. He was aware of the fact that Hua Menghan and Chen Ruochen were the experts of Truth Realm and shouldn't have any trouble breathing underwater. He continued the search inside the sea but was surprised to not see any demon beasts there, even though this part of the sea was supposed to be infested with several kinds of sea beasts. Of course, he didn't dare to approach the dark clouds. Yi Xuan walked for a day and night in the sea and finally reached the demon island. The island was completely surrounded by pitch-black clouds. This was a huge island of tens of thousands of miles in radius, floating in the boundless sea, while countless monstrous waves were crashing against it. On the island, Yi Xuan looked from afar and noticed that this was not so much of an island, but was more of a huge continent. The immense emerald green forest appeared pleasant to the eye. One could hear loud beastly roars coming from the woods from time to time. The terminus of the endless forest was actually a towering mountain, which was shrouded in dense fog. One could clearly see that it had a desolate atmosphere, which was continually spreading in all directions. Moreover, precious medicinal plants were present everywhere on the island, including some special herbs for cultivation like several types of ginseng, white fungus, grass fire, and so on. No wonder the Demon Island was so famous and attracted everyone's attention. After all, heavenly treasures and rare herbs were spread everywhere on this island. Yi Xuan, looking for a place to rest, sat down cross-legged and began to meditate to recover the lost Jin Yuan. In order to resist the aftermath of those attacks, he had almost depleted the reserves of Jin Yuan in his body. At this time, Yi Xuan wasn't interested in collecting herbs and heavenly treasures because restoring strength was more important to protect himself on this island, more than anything else, and although many of these treasures were important raw materials for medicines, but only for average experts. Considering Yi Xuan's cultivation level, these things didn't have any significance. Daytime passed quickly, and the island welcomed nightfall. Roar! 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 Numerous roars of unknown origin started to come from the center of the island, where the towering giant mountain was located. The noise from intermittent roars suddenly pulled him out of the meditation state. The fearful sound of roars induced a chilling sensation in Yi Xuan's heart. From the time he stepped on the island and came all the way to this place to rest, he saw several demon beasts on the way and was already accustomed to a variety of roars, which simply couldn't affect his concentration, but these horrifying roars that began to arise from that far-off giant mountain, after the nightfall, actually sent chills down his spine. The roars coming from that giant mountain were similar to the shrieks of a ghost, and definitely didn't seem to belong to a living creature. During the day, the mountain appeared to be shrouded in fog, but during the night, an endless amount of surging deadki would cover up the entire mountain area and also surge up into the sky, forming dense dark clouds. The usual roaring sounds of various demon beasts would vanish during the nightfall, and for the rest of the night, only the fearful shrieks would continue to transmit throughout the island. The rest of the demon island was always strangely quiet during the night, except the huge mountain which was the only source of those terrible roars. It's very strange. At this time, Yi Xuan was standing on a tall tree's branch and looking towards the huge mountain. The silver-colored starlight was sprinkled on his body, making him appear very cold and fierce. Well, that's quite a strong deadki and resentment. Yi Mo said. Cannot say how many people must have died to have caused such a dense accumulation of deadki. It's hard to guess the level of this powerhouse. Fair to say, it will be very difficult to kill him, but the point is that what in the world happened to have caused such a terrible scene? Yi Mo muttered. Yi Xuan looked at the giant mountain, surrounded by an encirclement of deadki, and frowned. This was an extremely terrible scene because the deadki was condensed to such an extent that it was visible even with the naked eye. The dreadful roars lasted until dawn. When the stars gradually faded away, the roars also died down. After a while, the deadki also dissipated in thin air, as if nothing happened. As the roars from the giant mountain disappeared, roars from all sorts of demon beasts began to resound throughout the island, just like the time when Yi Xuan stepped on this island a day ago. However, these beastly roars sounded pleasing to the ears when compared with the dreadful shrieks from last night. After a night's rest, Yi Xuan fully recovered. He was now sure of one thing, that this demon island was several times more dangerous than he imagined. Not only did he need to be careful of the other peerless geniuses, but this mysterious island itself was a terrible threat. So, now was the best time to familiarize himself with the new place and find other people. Since, Yi Xuan believed that he was not the only one who stepped on this island. Meanwhile, he also needed to find the whereabouts of Hua Menghan and Qin Ruochen. Yi Xuan believed in their strengths and knew that surviving shouldn't be a difficult task for them, so he just needed to scout the island and snoop for any news about the two. Although almost 1,000 people would be setting foot on the Demon Island, but very few would be of average level. The remaining majority of the candidates would turn out to be extraordinary experts, each possessing high cultivation levels. Chapter 219 God's Descendants. The giant mountain was actually only a part of the vast Sierra which crossed from the east to west side of the Demon Island. It was hard to see the terminus of the Sierra. Although the Demon Island was just an island in this boundless sea, but its size was simply beyond the imagination of an ordinary person. Yi Xuan was flying through the woods, and suddenly from afar, there came intermittent sounds of bang bang bang, one after another, and caused terrifying tremors in the ground. He finally found the source of this noise in the form of large mammoths which came running from far away, trampling and crushing everything in their path, including some of the great towering trees that might have lived for over a millennia. These mammoths actually looked like giant elephants, and almost each of them was about 30 feet tall, and their whole body was covered in brown hair. The two tusks were long, sharp at the tip and curved upward, which made them appear very ominous and dreadful. Almost each and every one of them was at either Truth 5th stage or in Small Truth realm. Although Yi Xuan had faced several monstrous beasts in the forest, but they all had retreated 3 days' march to give way in the face of Yi Zaiwen's superior strength, but right now, these ominous-looking mammoths were actually pursuing him. Ha! Accompanied by a loud shout, a sword in tension fell down from the sky. Puchi! A mammoth was directly cut down, the blood gushed out from the large gaping wound as it fell down on the ground. Yi Zaiwen's sharp eyes instantly saw a hint of dark golden color, concealed in the dark red blood. There was a faint trace of golden color in the blood as if a golden thread was mixed in the crimson blood. What? Golden blood? Yi Mo suddenly exclaimed in an astonished manner, how is this possible? This is the characteristic of a god. So these mammoths are actually God's descendants. God's descendants? What do you mean by that? You mean these mammoths turned out to be an immortal's descendants? Yi Xuan said in an equally astonished voice. God, the most formidable being among the most powerful creatures in the scope of the heaven and earth, and the most famous of whom was naturally the devil god, who was well known for his endless destructive prowess. The devil god gradually fell from his throne and position, but there were some people who possessed immortality and continued to live for generations. They were incredibly formidable beings and became well known in the 10,000 worlds, where some called them immortal sages and some called them gods. In fact, there was a way to ascertain a god's existence. A formidable immortal being contained golden blood in his veins, and their offspring also held golden blood in their body, but with the passage time, generation after generation, the golden blood continued to grow thinner. Even so, the gods' descendants possessed a natural talent and their practice speed was incomparably fast. In the last conversation, Yi Mo was talking on this topic but Yi Xuan didn't pay much attention. After all, he had never heard about God's descendants and neither did he believe in the existence of a creature called God. Yi Xuan was from the earth, and unlike most people there who worshipped different gods, he wasn't indulged in God worship, because he thought that God was a very formidable being and was simply beyond the comprehension of mere humans. In other words, the ancestors of mammoths actually turned out to be as strong as the immortals. Although he couldn't make a guess as to how many generations had already passed in the bloodline, but he was still shocked that the so-called immortals actually existed in this world. However, at this time, Yi Xuan didn't have time to ponder about this matter, because just then, he saw the fast-approaching figure of a man far in the horizon. Yi Xuan took a closer look and saw a man, roughly 30 years old in appearance and dressed in a brilliant warrior's clothing. He was a grandiose-looking man with somewhat rough facial features and a burly body. "Hello, brother." The young man's voice transmitted from afar and fell into Yi Zaiwen's ears, after traveling for miles as a sonic boom. The profoundness of his skill was simply unimaginable. "Hey, brother." Yi Xuan cupped his hands across his chest and said. "It's rare to see someone coming to this island so early." This man had a matured appearance and appeared very forthright. A jolly man like him would certainly not treat Yi Xuan as an enemy. Although the Demon Island was called a genius meat grinder, but not everyone was bloodthirsty. It was not a competition where only one person would get out alive. Since on such a dangerous island, one simply couldn't afford to offend everyone. Demon Island was going to stay open for a month, so the participants had a window of 1 month's time to reach the island. After 1 month, the island would close down and would open only after a year. Great Wu State, Wu Shaochuan. The man said with a smile. Great Yu State, Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen replied. You do not mind that I am a person from Great Wu State? Wu Shaochuan somewhat accidentally said. Although he meant it as a joke, but the fact was that Great Yu State and Great Wu State had a long border line, and one simply couldn't imagine the number of conflicts they have had for ages. When the state of Great Yu was formed and was relatively young, then Great Wu State had mobilized almost 1 million warriors to attack it. In the war, Great Yu State's founding emperor was seriously injured and ultimately died. Since then, both sides forged a deadly hatred for each other. In fact, Great Wu State was actually the most hated enemy of Great Yu State. Of course. Yi Shiwen said with a smile, after all, he didn't have a sense of belonging to this country itself. All he cared about was his family and friends. Haha, good, even I don't care about such bullshit matters about hatred and all. It really tires me to death. Wu Shaochuan laughed and said. You are a member of Great Wu State's royal clan, and if you don't care about all that, then why should I? Yi Shiwen also laughed and said. He could make out that this Wu Shaochuan was a relatively sincere and jolly person. It was actually rare to find a generous expert like him in this world. Wu Shaochuan's surname was Wu, and was derived from Great Wu State's royal clan, which also indicated that he was actually a royal prince. Although Great Wu State and Great Yu State were mortal enemies, but Yi Zaiwen's knowledge on the topic was quite limited. The time of his stay in this world was fairly short, and since the day he crossed over to this world, he had spent most of his time in practicing martial arts. Haha, well said. No matter what nonsense is going on between our countries, it has nothing to do with us, martial artists. Wu Shaochuan said with a smile. No one knew for how many years, there had been a rare quiet border between the two states, and it was already gradually evolving from hate between countries into a turf war. Yi Shiwen, why are you not together with the people of Great Yu State? Wu Shaochuan asked. Actually, I arrived here with 2 fellow disciples of Yi Yuan School, but 2 days ago, we bumped into a golden eagle which was chasing down several legendary level experts. Their battle caused the destruction of our boat, and I was also separated from them. Yi Shiwen said. Did you run into those idiots from Heavenly Rock faction? Wu Shaochuan asked. Do you know who they are? Yi Shiwen asked. N. Wu Shaochuan nodded and said, they were part of a rising big influence in our Great Wu State. When they learnt about the legend of the Demon Island, they sent a lot of formidable experts to capture the entire island. In the end, the golden-winged eagle killed numerous of their disciples and only a few old guys were able to escape from the island. But according to what you said, it seems they were chased down by the golden-winged eagle and ultimately perished at its claws. Those idiots were too arrogant. Did they really take the Demon Island's legend as a hoax? They once had a fearful influence, and were confident enough to plan a raid on the Demon Island, but in the end, they all died. And, now the weakened faction will soon break up into several small forces. Wu Shaochuan said with a look of disdain in his eyes. Obviously, he didn't have a favorable impression of them. Since you still haven't found your people, why don't you come and stay with us for the time being? Wu Shaochuan invited him. Then excuse me. Yi Shiwen was anyway looking for a gathering place for experts. There could be no better place than this to spread the news about Hua Menghan and Qin Ruochen. And perhaps, there, he might get some information about their whereabouts. Both Yi Shiwen and Wu Shaochuan traveled for about 100 li and finally reached a big mountain valley, where some warriors were gathered. All of them were truth-level experts, and not just that, most of them were the experts of truth 5th stage or above. However, there were several among them who wouldn't stand a chance against Yi Zaiwen's real strength. Seeing Wu Shaochuan flying across the sky alongside a youngster in black clothes, suddenly attracted the attention of several people. A young man and a young woman walked over to welcome them. This is Lu Yueru, a disciple of Evil Moon Valley. Wu Shaochuan introduced her to Yi Shiwen. She was a very beautiful woman and dressed in a long yellow skirt. She had a peerless appearance and looked just like a celestial fairy, with beautiful eyes and smooth snow-white skin. That is Xiao Zhen, the strongest disciple of East China Sea's magic sect. Wu Shaochuan said while pointing at a tall and handsome young man who looked roughly 20 years old. Brother Wu, this man is? Xiao Zhen asked. His name is Yi Shiwen, a disciple from Great Yu State's Yi Yuan School. He got separated from his group, so until he finds them, he will be staying here with us for some time. Wu Shaochuan replied. Welcome. Xiao Zhen said, but judging from his demeanor and the way he said it, it was quite apparent that he was looking down on Yi Shiwen. After all, on the outside, Yi Shiwen appeared to have recently stepped into the Truth Fourth stage. Such a cultivation level was actually considered a big feat among the 10 countries of Southeast region, but now on the Demon Island, it was considered nothing in the presence of strongest geniuses of the younger generation. Only those of the Truth Fifth stage or above could command respect on this island. Whether it was Wu Shaochuan, Xiao Zhen, or Lu Yueru, all of them were the experts with their cultivation above Truth Fifth stage and possessed terrifying auras. There was no way their auras was inferior to that of the Eighth Prince. As far as Xiao Zhen's rude attitude was concerned, Yi Shiwen was not angry or anything. After all, strength was the fundamental law of this world. While facing these gods' favored ones, Yi Shiwen really didn't have the qualification to be arrogant, but he was not discouraged. Their practice time was much more than his, and as long as there was enough time to practice, he would certainly be able to catch up with them and eventually surpass them. Chapter 220 Broken Relations. These people were lucky and could be called elites among the peerless geniuses in their respective forces, otherwise, there was no way to be summoned by Demon Island Bell. Everyone settled here and were waiting for more people to come, but it was only just the beginning. In the coming 10 days' time, more and more people would continue to arrive on the Demon Island. Then, it would truly be the most intense time. After all, besides competing with each other, these experts would have to deal with this mysterious island's environment. However, at least majority of them were not here to battle with others, but just to find various precious heavenly treasures, so there was no need to make enemies here and there. Of course, at some point, they might have to compete over rare treasure, and then if necessary, they wouldn't hesitate to kill. 10 days passed quickly, and during this period, more and more people arrived in this valley, and the number of gathered experts soon reached more than 200. Yi Shiwen did not stay here for a long time. Every time he stayed for some time then set out in search of Hua Menghan and Chen Ruochen. And, he did not want to stay here for a long time, because to be honest he didn't want to join their alliance. Yes, 3 days ago when Yi Shiwen returned from the search, he heard that an alliance had been formed during his absence. And it was made under the leadership of 3 super experts, namely Xiao Zhen, Lu Yueru, and Wu Shaochuan. The 3 super experts initiated the idea of forming an alliance and received many people's support. After all, if they could have the backing of an alliance, then treasure hunt would be fairly easy and safer. Of course, there were some ambitious people who didn't join the alliance. 3 days later when he arrived here, things had slightly changed and looked more formal. Even the population had decreased in the valley. Initially, there were 200 experts gathered here, but now merely 60 to 70 people stayed back and probably as part of the alliance. Yi Shiwen occasionally used to come here but only stayed for a while then used to leave in a hurry, so he didn't recognize several faces. He didn't even know when they built a small city in the valley. However, considering the magical powers and capabilities of these truth-level experts, building a small city from scratch shouldn't be too difficult. Today, when Yi Shiwen arrived, he saw that a group of warriors had arrived on the Demon Island. The group consisted of 10 men and was led by a tall skinny man, who was clad in leather clothing and had disheveled hair while there was an unchanging sinister and ruthless expression on his face. In front of him, a huge formidable-looking tiger was crouching on the ground and its roars were echoing throughout the valley. It seemed like they were waiting for the city gate to open, and there were few guard disciples stationed near the gate, which seemed a bit strange. After some time, the city gate finally opened. When the skinny man saw the gate opening, he lifted his chip up, puffed out his chest, and walked forward. Other members of the group immediately followed after him and none of them dared to overtake him. However, suddenly, all of them were surprised to see that from the other side, a black figure took the lead and went ahead, meanwhile also overtaking the skinny man in the process. A ruthless look appeared in that skinny man's eyes. He immediately used his mind connection with the tiger and ordered it to attack. A fierce and deafening roar resounded everywhere, and it suddenly transformed into a yellow and black lightning and leapt towards Yishuan from behind, while keeping its big mouth opened as if to bite him to death. The tiger's terrifying power was overflowing at this moment, and whether it was the guard disciples or the followers of the skinny man, all were trembling with fear. They were not strong enough in the face of such a beast, especially since they were mostly the experts of truth first stage, truth second stage or truth third stage at most. This tiger was at least a demon beast of small truth realm, so how could they not feel terror and threat from it? For experts of this age, stepping into the truth realm itself was a great feat. Reaching small truth realm was not something all could achieve at such a young age, except few exceptionally talented disciples like Xiao Zhen and handful of other experts. How is this possible? It was a small truth realm demon tiger and considered a frightening creature in the outer world, but was actually slaughtered in one blade attack. Who is this man and how is he so formidable? Do you want to die? The tall skinny powerhouse was furious, and was about to attack, but suddenly, the figure of a handsome young man came flying from the valley and landed on the scene. It was none other than Xiao Zhen, but at this time, there was a cold look on his face. Yishuan, are you trying to provoke battling heaven's brotherhood? Xiao Zhen glared at Yishuan and shouted. I am not trying to provoke anyone and neither do I intend to stir up trouble. If I am not welcome here then I will leave this instant. Yishuan looked calm and there was an ever-tranquil expression on his face, but there was anger surging in his heart. This Xiao Zhen didn't even bother to know what happened here and directly put the blame on him. Yi Zaiwen's flaming heart was restless with anger but he decided not to continue the conflict with Xiao Zhen, since there was a large difference between their levels. First, you kill my pet then you try to run away. Well, it's too late for that. The sinister-looking skinny man said with a ruthless look in his eyes. Do not mess with me, or I'll slaughter you just like I slaughtered your pet. Yishuan narrowed his eyes and fiercely said. Yishuan, how dare you behave so arrogantly? Xiao Zhen once again shouted out loud. Are you blind or what? Cannot you see who really is trying to provoke whom? Yishuan said in an anger-filled voice. Although he was aware of Xiao Zhen's tyrannical strength but he didn't care. Even if he couldn't beat Xiao Zhen, he could just open his devil wings and get out of here. He was being passive for now because he didn't want to break his relation with Wu Shaochuan, therefore even though he was furious right now, but he was holding himself so as to not completely ruin his relations with battling heaven's brotherhood. Immediately, Xiao Zhen felt that his dignity had been challenged while his sword-like fierce eyes were constantly staring at Yishuan. Brother Xiao, I arrived here with people of my tribe at your invitation and this guy killed my most important partner. Today, if I do not kill him then it will be difficult to bear the hatred in my heart. The skinny tribal youth's insidious eyes were stubbornly staring at Yishuan. You seem quite eager to die. I'll gladly buy you a ride to hell. Yishuan said in a calm voice, but his cold gaze was as if piercing the skinny man. You're really arrogant. Is this how you want to challenge our battling heaven's brotherhood? Xiao Zhen said and looked coldly at Yishuan. If not considering the relationship between this boy and Wu Shaochuan then he would have already beheaded this rampant boy. Obviously, this is a matter between him and me, what does this have to do with battling heaven brotherhood? It is imperative that you keep on proclaiming the name of battling heaven's brotherhood, because, in your eyes, it is just a tool to be used for your convenience. Yi Zaiwen's accurate words directly hit the mark. Yishuan wasn't afraid of him, and at the worst he would leave this place. After all, his cultivation level was far worse than that of Xiao Zhen, so fighting him was not an option. But that was only for now because later, the situation might be different, therefore, he was not afraid of Xiao Zhen. And as far that skinny youth was concerned, Yishuan was simply not paying attention to him. The skinny man was certainly an extremely formidable powerhouse and was at the peak of small truth, but it was not enough to impress Yishuan. After all, the skinny man's current battle strength was only comparable to Yizaiwan's battle strength when he used to be on Truth 3rd layer, and now, Yishuan had already broken through to the Truth 4th stage. After listening to the words of Yishuan, there was a sudden commotion among the members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood. Everyone saw what happened there and they were certainly smart enough to figure out who was at fault here. It was the skinny man who first tried to kill Yishuan, and when Yishuan acted in self-defense, he was actually accused of provoking their brotherhood. Xiaozhen made an appearance and interfered, but if he had acted alone, nobody would say anything. However, he kept on proclaiming in the name of brotherhood, which was not a right thing to do. Why was he pulling them into this matter for no reason? Indeed, they were now the members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, but they joined it just because they were looking for a backing since they were looking for protection. They didn't join the Brotherhood to act as someone's lackeys and be treated as cannon fodder. One must know, even the most ordinary members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood were actually considered super geniuses at their respective native places, plus they were also the center of attraction in their sections. None of them was foolish enough to willingly act as a cannon fodder for someone else's sake. Xiaozhen also noticed the commotion among the members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, and his complexion suddenly turned unsightly. He immediately looked towards Yishuan but actually saw that his fierce eyes were full of hostility and killing intention. No one knew what Yishuan was thinking and why he had not yet taken any action. Yishuan did not stay, just turned around and left, but was actually secretly prepared to immediately fight back if someone tried to attack him. But after this matter, he knew one thing, that his relation with Battling Heaven's Brotherhood had completely broken off, even though there was no good relationship between them to begin with. Xiaozhen didn't know what to do until Yizaiwan's figure vanished from there. He didn't do anything to stop Yishuan and let him go, but the killing intention in his eyes was still unabated. Chapter 221, Gilded Tyrant Form. After breaking off his relations with Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, now Yishuan would need to figure out a new way of finding the whereabouts of Hua Menghan and Qin Ruochen, but he did not regret it. He couldn't stand the other party's rampant attitude and the way they were trying to put blame on him again and again. If Xiaozhen was not there, then he would probably have slaughtered the skinny man right on the spot. Yishuan walked toward the depths of the Demon Island and arrived at a seemingly restricted area. This whole area was lush green with towering big ancient-looking trees, completely obscuring the sky. This Demon Island is too weird. Yimo's voice resounded in Yizaiwan's mind. I have spent so many years following the Great Devil King on expeditions, but I have never seen such a strange place. The quantity of lingqi was adequate for the island and by far more ample than the outside world, but it was a place where demon beasts ran amok. Even at Yizaiwan's level, he always needed to be cautious, and from time to time, extremely frightening demon beasts would cross from the land or sky. If Yizaiwan's restraining breath technique was not operating all the time, he simply wouldn't be able to roam around the island without being noticed. Yizaiwan's gaze fell upon a wreckage located in a far-off place and he quickly flew over to that place. The entire place had been nearly obscured by towering ancient trees, but he was still able to see a huge white marble-paved plaza at the bottom. A stone structure, placed right between two trees, attracted Yizaiwan's attention. It should have been a huge stone, about 10 meters high. It seemed like the stone structure was cut off and only 1/3 of the original structure remained. He noticed that there were vague ancient seal characters inscribed on it. He went forward and stretched his hand to wipe off the dirt from the ancient seal characters. Suddenly, at this moment, the ancient seal characters began to glow and the surrounding scenery suddenly transformed. Yishuan suddenly felt his soul hanging in the sky, positioned right above a huge palace. Boom! Boom! Numerous electric snakes could be seen creeping in the black clouds and a terrifying thunder struck the palace. The palace couldn't withstand the enormous destructive power contained in the thunder strike and crumbled down. I am here, now come out. Suddenly, a majestic voice resounded in all directions, Buzz. The low and dull muffled sound of a bell resounded and instantly sent out numerous sonic waves everywhere, while several electric snakes could be seen lurking in the dark cloud, and seemed all prepared to bring down chaos in this world. Get lost! Accompanied by a loud shout, a few 100 feet wide pillar of golden light went straight into the sky and dispersed the dark thundering clouds. As the voice fell, a middle-aged man flew out of the wreckage of palace and coldly looked towards the sky. He had a dignified bearing and was clad in a golden-colored emperor's robe. In the sky, the scattered clouds suddenly agglutinate again and revealed a huge glowing eye in the center. If you dare to go against the heavens' will, you cannot do that without a fight. A muffled voice echoed everywhere. And a huge lightning maliciously struck down. The scene had a crazy transformation in an instant. Right before Yi Zaiwen's eyes, the golden-robed middle-aged man suddenly jumped and a blast of flames spread beneath his feet as if produced by the terrifying explosion of countless stars. This world is unkind to a myriad of things and treats weak as worthless. If I were to become the god of this world, I will certainly spread the notion of fair and justice and create eternal peace. Yi Shiwen. Yi Mo's loud shout echoed in Yi Zaiwen's mind and forcibly pulled him out of the illusion. Yi Shiwen could not help but held his breath. Just now, he was completely trapped inside the illusion, and if Yi Mo hadn't stopped him, then he probably would have sunk deeper into the illusion, until his soul vanished without a trace. This place was indeed too weird, and at this time, Yi Shiwen was suddenly able to understand what was inscribed on the stone. It was written in esoteric seal characters of some ancient sect. But it was just a guess on his part since there was no proof available. He was still very perplexed after witnessing such a shocking scene inside that illusion. Judging from surging yaoqi in the sky, it may be because of a mighty demon king's death. What I am trying to say is that this place is the tomb of a demon king. Yi Mo said in a serious tone, Yi Shiwen, maybe, this time, we have come to a wrong place. If this place is really the tomb of a demon king, then it is absolutely one of the most deadly places between heaven and earth. Yi Shiwen frowned and said, fortunately, in the past, many people are said to have died in the conquest of the younger generation, but in comparison, not too many people died on the demon island. Maybe, but this place is a natural hunting ground. In the last few days, you have killed so many demon beasts, and several among them contained golden thread in their blood, although only a little, but enough to explain that they are Immortal's descendants. And guess what? I have a way to extract the god's divinity from their blood, then you will be able to assimilate it into your body. That should help in upgrading your tyrant body technique and help you achieve the formidable golden body of gods. A supreme body, an incomparably tough flesh, granting you enough strength to tear even the gods to shreds. Yi Mo couldn't hold the excitement surging inside his heart. How could he not when the gods' power was right in front of their eyes? All they needed was to step forward and take it in their grasp. For any god clan, awakening the blood of God was very precious for the children, and once it happened, they were immediately included in the elite training and were also called God's descendants. Not to mention, they were also targeted by enemies quite often. One must know that god clans were all immortals and were rumored to have obtained immortality from the first gods. Perhaps second or third generation of God's descendants was still alive and was considered closest existence to a god and didn't die easily. These old people were extremely tyrannical, capable of bringing chaos to the entire world. So, no one dared to annoy these god clans, not just because they were immortals and extremely tyrannical, but also because they knew ancient martial arts and secret magical techniques. This was common in all of the 10,000 worlds. Seeing God's descendants was difficult, let alone killing them could easily cause a huge uproar and stir controversies. Although the divinity contained in the blood of God's descendants was quite thin and weak, but the quantity was extremely large. Perhaps, a year's time should be enough to collect enough divinities to completely practice gilded tyrant form. Yi Shiwen had an old monster like Yi Mo on his side to help him. If it was an ordinary expert, then it would be impossible for them to achieve such a thing, but if this year, he continued to absorb the divinity of these demon beasts, then gradually, his future practice would benefit a lot from this. Perhaps, this was the reason why the practice speed was usually faster on the Demon Island, and this was also one of the important reasons why experts desired to come to this island. Puchi. A demon beast's scaly body was directly chopped into pieces by Yi Zaiwen's long blade and its blood gushed out. As he expected, a golden thread was present in the crimson blood. Under the guidance of Yi Mo, he began to absorb the divinity of that demon beast. Yi Xuan began to mobilize the tyrant body technique within his body, which formed a bronze sheen on his body, making it look strong and tougher than before. Yi Xuan looked slim, but it was only because of his natural build. No one should make a fatal mistake of underestimating his strength. After fully absorbing the divinity, Yi Xuan noticed a change occurring in his tyrant body technique. A slight trace of golden color had begun to surface on his bronze skin. All of the gathered silky golden threads completely covered his body, and then only, Yi Xuan finally learned that the gilded tyrant form was a success. An overbearing and tyrannical might as if exploded inside his body, making his already enormous might even more terrifying. After the assimilation of divinity was complete, the golden color of his skin gradually faded and turned back to bronze. Yi Xuan sighed and said, "This will not do, the divinity of a small truth-level demon beast can only slightly enhance my gilded tyrant form, and the overall progress is not even 1 out of 10,000. Yi Xuan killed for 1 whole day and night and he slaughtered only God's descendants, but in the end, the overall progress in gilded tyrant form was accountable to only 5 out of 10,000 parts. At this rate, he would have to kill tens of thousands of God's descendants of small truth realm in order to finish the practice of gilded tyrant form. Perhaps the time period of 1 year was not enough to finish gilded tyrant form. And this was the only chance to finish the practice of gilded tyrant form. After all, he was on the infamous Demon Island and it was filled with opportunities in the form of God's descendants. If he was unable to complete this technique on the Demon Island, he might not find God's descendants elsewhere and gilded tyrant form would end up being an unfinished technique. I say we find those mythical demon beasts of beyond the legendary realm, for example, the golden-winged eagle that we saw earlier. Yi Mo said with a smile. Do you want me to die? Yi Xuan frowned and said. Well, you do not need to go for those formidable beasts when you can always aim for their eggs or cubs. For now, let's start by targeting the young ones. Chapter 222, World Law Fragment, Roar. A demon beast's roar resounded throughout the forest, and the color of the sky suddenly faded when the huge figure of a flame bird flew across the sky. The places it flew over instantly caught fire, and it seemed as if the space itself was melting in its presence. Its dreadful roars were shaking the mountains. Yi Xuan was hiding amidst a thick patch of grass and felt relieved when he looked towards the furious flame bird, which was, at this moment, flying away towards the horizon. In his arms, he was holding a big round egg, almost half his size. This flame bird was a descendant of Phoenix, an ancient god beast. Moreover, it was quite closely related as well. After reaching adulthood, a flame bird easily surmounted the legendary level. Yi Xuan was greatly relieved and looked at the glowing red egg held gently in his bosom. This was a big harvest. In order to obtain this egg, it could be said that he had a narrow escape. Flame birds were very cautious while taking care of their own egg. Of course, because of the very tight security, most people simply couldn't get close, but since Yi Xuan relied on the magical properties of restraining breath technique, so he was able to approach the egg and then quietly carry it away. Yi Xuan found a cave, then gently put down the egg. In the dark cave, the egg was exuding a fiery light. Yi Xuan did not hesitate to activate Tyrant Body technique and began to absorb the egg's essence. It could be seen that the flame bird's chick had not yet taken shape inside the egg. From the appearance, it just looked like a vague collection of the essence. Bye! Yi Xuan heard a crisp sound, and a blazing red soul of the flame bird's chick, which flew out of the broken egg, was directly absorbed by him. Yi Zaiwen's bronze-colored skin climbed up several levels while there appeared a faint trace of golden color on his skin. After all, Flame Bird was the descendant of an ancient beast and was not very far apart in bloodline. Although he didn't absorb the essence of an adult bird, but the inherent divinity contained in that egg was far beyond what he hoped to obtain by killing those other demon beasts earlier. According to his estimate, if he later killed an adult flame bird, then the divinity obtained from its body should be enough to complete the practice of gilded tyrant form in one fell swoop. However, it was an impossible task at his current level, since an adult flame bird was a beast of an entirely different realm, and even legendary level experts didn't stand a chance in front of it. In addition to divinity, there was no small energy contained in the egg, and once all of it was absorbed by him, his inner state slowly began to break. He had spent a long time on the Truth Fourth stage, and even after practicing day and night, there was almost no sign of a breakthrough, but after absorbing the divinity present in the egg's essence, his stubbornly immobile cultivation finally started to break. The next morning, Yishuan finally opened his eyes and there was an excited look on his face. After a night's time passed, he had finally completely refined the flame bird's egg. His body no longer appeared the same as earlier, and occasionally, traces of golden threads could be seen floating in his eyes. It seemed as if the absorbed golden threads were concentrated in his eyes, and whenever he activated Tyrant Body Technique, his bright golden eyes flashed in the cave. Moreover, as he would continue to absorb divinity more and more, his entire body would be covered with a toughened golden layer, and by that time, when he would thoroughly carry out the gilded tyrant form, then his body would become incomparably tough and fearful. To be precise, the practice of Tyrant Body Technique didn't start in Xiantian realm, but in the early stages of Hotian realm. So, usually, even though the body would become very tough at the end of practice, but the end result was generally completely different from the real thing. Tyrant Body Technique was an ancient martial art and had been created by an ancient tyrant king. It was a fearful technique, and the rumors said that its practitioner could actually slay gods and devils. Although Tyrant Body Technique was an intrepid technique, but gilded tyrant form was its enhanced version, thereby making it even more dreadful. Others certainly didn't dare to randomly make changes to the martial arts left behind by predecessors, especially when Tyrant Body Technique was such a high-handed martial art, but this was not the case for Yishuan. Right after crossing the first layer of Tyrant Body Technique, he began to figure out his own comprehension of the technique. Although he didn't know much about the original thing, but he believed that with the help of mysterious space, he should be able to comprehend this technique. Even though it might not become like the original, it would certainly not be inferior either. Since the beginning of second layer of Tyrant Body Technique, Yishuan began to have his own understanding and developed it in his own way. As a result, its comprehension reached unprecedented proportions, probably even more than that of the Supreme Master who invented it. After all, unlike him, Yishuan had mysterious space which helped him to uncover and patch the loopholes. So, in the end, Yishuan dared to join the rank of gods, and in doing so, he ended up developing his own technique, which he named Gilded Tyrant Form. Gilded Tyrant Form was a tyrannical technique, and when compared to Tyrant Body Technique on the same level, it was much more terrifying. After all, the divine power of gods was used in it. Hence, its might was naturally going to be on an entirely different level. Yishuan was confident about his practice thanks to his stock of countless Ling Dawn and Spirit Stones. Compared to the beginning of the practice schedule for Gilded Tyrant Form, Yishuan was more pleased to have finally taken the most important step towards reaching the pinnacle of Truth 5th stage, because his accumulation was really too vigorous, much more vigorous than anyone else. When he was at Truth 3rd stage, his battle strength had reached the peak level of Small Truth Realm, and after the breakthrough to Truth 4th stage, he had once again reached a satisfactory amount of accumulation, almost reaching the point where there should be a shift from quantitative to qualitative change, but there was still the need for a final push. And now, with the help of Flame Bird's egg, the high-level life energy absorbed from it helped Yishuan in finally attaining a qualitative change in his energy, and he crossed the threshold, ultimately stepping into Small Truth Realm. Now, his battle strength was enough to beat the experts of Truth's 6th stage. This meant that Yishuan finally entered the ranks of the strongest experts on the Demon Island. Not to forget that this time, almost 1,000 peerless geniuses had set foot on this island. And among them, of course, the experts of Truth 1st stage, 2nd stage, 3rd stage, 4th stage and 5th stage were in majority. However, the experts of Small Truth Realm were a rare presence, not to mention there were only 20 to 30 experts of Truth 6th stage and above. Yi Xuan had tasted the sweetness, and if he was able to complete the gilded tyrant form, then his body would be toughened to what extent, no one could predict. However, since he relied on the egg's energy to have a breakthrough, so in the future, it would be difficult to reach the next breakthrough. Later, he would have to continue to accumulate in order to reach the next breakthrough. On this island, besides a terrifying creature like the flame bird, there were several other tyrannical creatures, not to mention they had cubs or eggs. Basically, they were going to help Yi Xuan in perfecting gilded tyrant form until he would transform into a fearful golden god. One could imagine the kind of fate those pups were going to suffer. But before Yi Xuan could think more on this, suddenly, a loud ringing sound of bells began to transmit from a distant place, and along with that, a multicolored light scattered in the sky and enveloped the entire island, in the form of a terrifying enchantment barrier. Ding! Dong! Ding! The intermittent ringing sound of a melodious bell began to resound unceasingly throughout the demon island, and even the demon beasts were excited all of a sudden. Roar! 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 All of the demon beasts throughout the island were excited. They turned their faces towards the sky and began to give out long and loud roars as if trying to respond to the bell's call. The island is closing up. Yi Mo said. Yi Xuan nodded. This also meant that they were about to enter the most brutal phase of fighting and competition on the island. During the year, no one would have any means to contact the outside world. They would have to rely only on themselves. At the same time, everyone would also slowly reveal true nature and get involved in unscrupulous battles. Sooner or later, the conquest for treasures would start, then things would start to get bloodier and brutal. Everyone on the island was still immersed in the colorful rays of light when the ringing bells sealed the island. And, a rumor immediately swept across the island. Apparently, some people found world law fragment within a sierra. Suddenly, this caused a sensation throughout the demon island. Perhaps experts of Xiantian realm might not know the significance of a law fragment, but that was not true for truth-level experts, especially not for the super-genius experts, summoned on this island. Regardless of what level of pious life a person had led, they must come in contact of world laws to progress further. World laws and principles were more like the essence of everything between the heaven and the earth. In order to practice further, one must grasp the essence of world laws. This was also the only way to step into the legendary realm. There was no other way because the so-called truth realm was only a platform where one needed to prepare themselves for understanding the world laws. Legendary realm experts were actually the tyrannical experts who were able to comprehend world laws to a certain extent. Although the truth level experts also comprehended world laws, but only to a very small extent. And it was only sufficient to help them rank up within the truth realm, but not enough to step into the legendary realm. The so-called half-step legendary experts could vaguely touch the world laws, but weren't able to fully touch. That's why they were still in a vague muddle-like realm and unable to step into the legendary realm. Just by relying on one's own insight, even peerless geniuses would find it extremely difficult and time-taking to comprehend world laws, which was the reason why there were several hundred true disciples in Yi Yuan school but only a handful of legendary experts. To be continued. Chapter 223, Next Encounter with Battling Heaven's Brotherhood. Truth level experts only comprehended the basic world laws in order to prepare themselves for understanding complex laws in the future. However, only after stepping into the legendary realm, experts began to have preliminary contact with advanced world laws. But there was no easy way to comprehend these laws. In fact, most people simply didn't know what to do in order to comprehend world laws. Among nearly 10,000 people, only one person could comprehend a law on their own, and even on the Demon Island, a gathering place for super geniuses, not more than 10 people had the ability to comprehend on their own. Not to mention, this island was a gathering place for the supreme geniuses from the 10 countries of Southeast region. And these so-called super geniuses had been selected from millions of geniuses, and even after that, only a few were capable of self-comprehension. This proved the extreme difficulty of comprehending world laws in the truth level, but there was a way for them to make contact with advanced world laws. And it was to obtain the world law fragments. A law fragment was such a rare and precious item that even legendary experts didn't have a way to obtain one, which showed the extent of its preciousness. Corresponding to its degree of importance and the extent of its rarity, it was obvious that experts throughout the island burst with joy and excitement. The first law fragment was captured by Zhang Ying, the leader of the Demon Island's strongest alliance called Eagle Union. According to rumors, he possessed earth-shattering power and killed all those who tried to block his way. The first law fragment not only attracted lots of human experts but also many demon beasts, among which, some had intelligence and knew about the importance of a law fragment while others were clueless and were just following the wise ones. Just one piece of law fragment led to the tragic death of more than 20 peerless geniuses. One could imagine the intensity of battle that took place. The first law fragment appeared, followed by the second one, third and fourth one until the eighth law fragment appeared. This suddenly fired up the mood of many people. After all, these were the law fragments. In the past, even if they were considered the topmost geniuses in their respective forces, but a law fragment was still out of their reach. And with the help of these fragments, promotion to the legendary realm would become an easy task. And most importantly, by the time the first 4 law fragments had already made an appearance, they all knew that not many fragments would come out after them, and the next one might be the last piece. There were several experienced experts who knew the reason why these law fragments appeared. In fact, it was related to the sealed island. They speculated that this might be related to the separation of this island's space from outside. When the island's space was separated, several world laws were also cut apart and were left behind in the form of fragments. It was quite common for fissures to appear in space, and since these people were each top-level genius, of course, weren't ignorant like other people. They knew that all sorts of space cracks appeared in this world and many law fragments appeared in the surroundings of these space cracks. And over there, many people kept on waiting for the fragments to appear, but they mostly belonged to a big influence. Not to mention, these forces were tyrannical and weren't like Yuan school that dominated only a small part of a state. Instead they dominated an entire continent. Moreover, the space around those cracks had many threats. After all, there was no way to find out what kind of unknown world was present on the other side of the broken space. It might end being a terrifying world like the Devil World. All in all, even for them, the law fragments were too precious to lose. Not to mention, space surrounding the island was slowly consolidating, hence the law fragments were getting fewer and fewer. On the first day, 2 law fragments appeared at once, but now, they were appearing less and less often. Everyone was excited. While there was still anticipation in the eyes of everyone, the 9th piece of world law finally appeared. And, even Yi Shiwen was looking forward to obtain this one. Because by observing Tianyuan Mirror, Yi Shiwen found out that the island's space had completely consolidated and had stabled down, which also meant that it might be the last piece of law fragment. Do not have too high hopes, since you are not like them. Yi Mo smiled and said, "You are the next great devil king, so how can you possibly be like them? You must take the unprecedented path and must make your own path. Of course, this is a shortcut, but if you take it then your future achievement will be limited." Yi Mo had not given up on the plans of making Yi Shiwen the next great devil king, but Yi Shiwen ignored what he said just now because he was already accustomed to such talks. Almost every day, Yi Mo had been talking about it again and again, but from Yi Zaiwen's indifferent attitude, it was apparent that he was not at all interested. There are a lot of people who will integrate the law fragment into the body, and on successful completion, the body will start resonating with the law. Yi Mo said, but integrating the law this way is actually a gamble of life and death. If the development potential of integrated law is stronger, then their future development potential will be stronger as well. However, if the development potential of integrated law is poor, then their future development potential will be nothing. But if the comprehended law is compatible with them, then later in the future, they can enjoy boundless prospects. Yi Mo explained. But still, I can refer to it, right? Yi Shiwen said. No matter what, regardless of whether I am going to use it or not, I have already decided to seize this ninth law fragment for myself. Yi Shiwen clenched his fist and said. Yi Shiwen and Yi Mo immediately rushed in the direction where the ninth piece had supposedly made an appearance. In a while, they arrived at a very large open space and saw the ninth law fragment floating in the sky. Die! Kill them all, this law fragment is mine. Numerous battle cries could be heard reverberating in the mountains, and in the forest, the corpses of over 100 experts could be seen lying on the ground. Various martial arts were rumbling in the field and magical tools could be seen dancing in the air. The whole scene simply resembled an Azura battlefield. This is more intense than we imagined. Yi Mo said. Yi Shiwen looked from afar and saw that Battling Heaven's Brotherhood was at war with another alliance, and at this time, two formidable leaders namely Xiao Zhen and Lu Yueru were going all out and were rapidly pressing the other alliance. Yi Shiwen felt somewhat strange when he didn't see Wu Shaochuan. Now the Demon Island was bustling with dozens of alliances, large and small. The strongest among them was Eagle Union, with its weakest member being an expert of Truth's 6th stage. Soon, the alliance, which was fighting with Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, realized that they weren't a match for the opposite party and quickly withdrew. Yi Shiwen was carefully observing the situation on the battlefield, but suddenly, a huge axe was thrown over towards him at a lightning speed and instantly arrived in front of him. Yi Shiwen hastily retreated few steps, and suddenly, a huge double-edged axe severely struck the ground and got embedded in the ground. With a loud bang, the surrounding land in the radius of few hundred meters trembled with shock. Yi Shiwen was suddenly furious since he almost avoided being chopped in half. This sneak attack was too outrageous. Yi Shiwen looked up and saw that it was none other than that skinny tribal youth whose pet tiger had been slaughtered by him. Yi Shiwen stared coldly at the skinny youth, who was also keeping a close eye on him. Then, Yi Shiwen slowly walked towards the double-edged axe, grabbed its handle and sent a burst of Jin Yuan into the tool in order to gain the control over it, then gave a cold glance to that skinny youth. Yi Shiwen immediately twisted his waist backwards and hurled the long axe. Shwa! 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 The huge axe went spinning and chopping the air like a fearful tornado, towards the skinny youth. This tornado was lightning fast since Yi Shiwen had quickly used some of the raw might of gilded tyrant form, while throwing the axe. Puchi! His blood, like a streaming fountain, splashed all over the ground, when the huge axe chopped him into two halves and stubbornly nailed itself to the ground. There was a look of shock and disbelief while he kept on staring at Yi Shiwen. He never imagined that Yi Shiwen would turn out to be so strong. Yi Shiwen, it's actually you, so you are really going to oppose us? Xiao Zhen's frightening roar echoed throughout the battlefield. Right before his eyes, Yi Shiwen directly killed the skinny youth, and this was no different from throwing a severe slap on his face. Isn't he? Lu Yueru muttered when she clearly recognized Yi Shiwen. Wu Shaochuan invited this boy to stay with them, but he left soon afterwards, and later she heard that some trouble occurred and he broke off his relation with Battle Heaven's Brotherhood and never appeared again. But this time, even the members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood appeared confused when they saw Yi Shiwen. After all, in front of their eyes, he killed their comrade. No matter how one looked at this, it was apparent that he was not a friend. It's quite simple. You see, he wanted to kill me, so I killed him. It's that simple. Yi Shiwen said indifferently, but there was a brutal look in his eyes. Then, he slowly walked towards the Central Committee of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, as if dozens of other members simply didn't exist at all. He approached the leaders of the Brotherhood and bravely stood right in front of them. Dash. Chapter 224, Completely Suppressed. It's quite simple. You see, he wanted to kill me, so I killed him. It's that simple. Yi Shiwen said indifferently, but there was a brutal look in his eyes. Then, he slowly walked towards the Central Committee of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, as if dozens of other members simply didn't exist at all. He approached the leaders of the Brotherhood and bravely stood right in front of them. Do you really want to fight with us and treat us like your enemy? Xiaozhen asked coldly. Your enemy? It seems like you are repeatedly trying to start a fight with me. Yi Shiwen said with disdain. He wasn't some weakling who would lie down and take punches. Yi Shiwen looked at the law fragment which was floating above the center of the field. It was exuding a faint pattern of light. Yi Shiwen indifferently said, I will take this law fragment and consider it as an apology from your side. How dare you? Xiaozhen was suddenly furious. They were the first to obtain news about ninth fragment's appearance, and then they had to fight and win an arduous battle to obtain it. And now, this Yi Shiwen actually wanted to take it away from him. Yi Shiwen, first you kill our comrade, and now you are trying to snatch away this hard-earned law fragment. Have you gone out of your mind? At this time, Lu Yueru said, after all, Yi Shiwen was somehow related to Wu Shaochuan, so she tried her best to not sound very rude. This is a law fragment, you and I are well aware of its value. As long as you hand it over to me, I am willing to write off the resentment between us. Yi Shiwen indifferently said. As if we will listen to you. Xiaozhen was extremely furious and his figure instantly turned into a streamer of light as he rushed towards Yi Shiwen. The long sword in his hand released a terrifying sword light, which instantly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. Gilded Tyrant Form. Yi Shiwen instantly activated Gilded Tyrant Form, and his entire body turned bronze in color. In the sunlight, it seemed as if he was a reincarnation of an ancient god. Yi Shiwen raised his hand which transformed into a claw and directly crushed that sword light to smithereens, while at the same time, his other palm turned into a dragon. The huge dragon opened its mouth and flew towards Xiaozhen. Xiaozhen barely managed to evade this attack and that huge dragon nipped on the piece of ground, where he was standing an instant ago, and blasted a big hole in the ground. Well, I never thought that I was actually mistaken about your strength. Xiaozhen was short of breath and said with an anxious smile, not just me, everyone is mistaken about your strength, including Wu Shaochuan. I didn't expect that your actual strength would be so profound. Xiaozhen never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually be so powerful that even a Truth 6th stage expert like him would feel overwhelmed. However, since he never realized it before, so there was a feeling of being fooled in his heart. But your luck will stop here because making an enemy out of battling Heaven's Brotherhood is your biggest mistake. Xiaozhen roared and rushed towards Yi Shiwen, while simultaneously releasing a terrifying sword light towards him. By this time, Gilded Tyrant Form had been mobilized to the extreme, and Yi Shiwen looked like an ancient overlord reborn. His overwhelming imposing aura instantly overran towards Xiaozhen. Sword light and domineering imposing aura maliciously hit together. Boom! Accompanied with a loud noise and layer after layer of shock waves, an incomparably bright light swept away in all directions. Boom! A big hole instantly appeared on the ground where the explosion took place. Yi Ziwen's bronze skin was glowing in the sun, and there was a trace of golden color in it, making him appear like a divine being, a golden god of war. Everyone froze when they witnessed this scene, especially the people of battling Heaven's Brotherhood. Some of them knew Yi Shiwen but never expected that he would be able to defeat their boss. Boom! 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 Both sides mercilessly and relentlessly shot. Yi Ziwen's palm transformed into a dragon and without giving an opportunity to Xiaozhen to react, it completely suppressed him. Xiaozhen was depressed because he never thought that he would be suppressed like this by Yi Shiwen. This was like the most ridiculous joke in the entire world. He never thought that Yi Shiwen, a guy whom he underestimated and simply never paid attention to, would thoroughly suppress him like this. The two men went all the way into the woods, and were as fast as lightning, fighting along the way and destroying everything in their path. Their violent and immense energy was destroying the surrounding forest bit by bit. Complexions of the members of battling Heaven's Brotherhood suddenly paled. Such a battle was extremely terrifying, although they were also known as gifted disciples, but could never dare of being the opponents of those two. These two men were insanely powerful, to the extent that the ordinary experts of Truth 6th stage weren't their match. In other words, these two could be considered as super experts even on the Truth 6th stage. And Yi Shiwen could be called the king of the experts of Truth 6th stage. Xiaozhen's incredible fearful long sword was capable of destroying the hardest of defenses, but Yishuan was even more fearful. He actually stopped this long sword with his bare hands, which actually left Xiaozhen in an unbearable panic-stricken state. What kind of dreadful body was this? Unexpectedly, his swordlight was unable to put even a scratch on Yi Zaiwen's body. Yi Zaiwen's invincible body was just like an absolute impenetrable defense. Bang! 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 Yi Zaiwen's palm attack gave rise to a wind blade which fiercely clashed with Xiaozhen's long sword, and the horrifying force made him tremble, making him lose his footing. Bang! Xiaozhen was sent flying several miles away, hitting several ancient towering trees on the way. This scene made so many people look incredibly at Yishuan, as if they were looking at a monster. They were well aware of the fact that Xiaozhen was a very powerful man and undoubtedly deserved to be their leader, but just because they knew this, therefore they couldn't ignore Yi Zaiwen's tyrannical strength, which was able to suppress their leader to such an extent. Yishuan instantly flew forward, chasing after Xiaozhen's flying body, and a large dragon claw suddenly collided with Xiaozhen's long sword. The sword exploded and split into fearful rays of light that immediately swept off and spread in all directions. Xiaozhen was also hit by the fearful blast and spat out a mouthful of blood. But at this time, Lu Yueru finally made a move and instantly waved her long blue sword, throwing a blue sword ki towards Yishuan. Yishuan took a casual sidestep and effortlessly evaded that sword ki. Yishuan stood there firm like a mountain, and slowly turned his face towards Lu Yueru. Her complexion suddenly paled as she never wanted to attack him, she was just trying to save Xiaozhen. She, then, clenched her fists and lightly said, Yishuan, since you want this law fragment, then we won't take it. I hope it's possible to write off the grudge between us with this. Hearing Lu Yueru's words, Xiaozhen was depressed to the point of vomiting blood, but he also knew that she was right. Yishuan was extremely terrifying, and no one in the entire Battling Heaven Brotherhood could possibly dream of taking him on. Only he knew the feeling of terror and dread he had to go through just now while facing Yishuan. It was like facing a violent storm head-on, which made him choke several times. He was doing his best to survive, as his battle with Yishuan was no different from a desperate battle for survival. Just for the sake of survival, he would have to give up on the law fragment. He had been the leader of the younger generation for several years, but in front of Yishuan, he collapsed at the first blow. Yishuan seemed entirely different from before, and this aggrieved his heart even more. However, Xiaozhen knew that her words were right. If Yishuan lost his cool, then he would really end up obliterating their entire existence. Not to forget, on the Demon Island, there were no elders to save their asses from Yishuan. The strong commandeered the world while the weak became their game, it was that simple. Yishuan didn't care about what they were really thinking. Although Xiaozhen was powerful, but according to Yishuan, he still wasn't an opponent of the Eighth Prince. Yishuan had a profound impression of the Eighth Prince's strength. Yishuan was impatient about enhancing his own strength. Yi Zaiwen's strength was at the peak of Truth's 6th stage, and if he was to fight the 8th prince at his current strength, then he would be at great disadvantage. But if Yishuan continued to enhance his cultivation on the Demon Island as planned, then it would be hard to guess his level until his next meeting with the 8th prince. After hearing Lu Yueru's words, Yishuan lightly said, "As long as you do not cause any trouble for me, I will naturally let you go." Lu Yueru understood what Yishuan meant. The fear of Yishuan was deeply embedded in her heart, not mention it had intensely impacted on her mind as well. Yi Zaiwen's reservoirs were too deep and profound. Earlier, when he arrived with Wu Shaochuan, he was still at Truth 4th stage and his aura was quite ordinary, but now, all of a sudden, she came to know that it was all fake. Was it seriously possible for a 4th stage expert to dominate a 6th stage expert? But what she did not know that earlier, Yishuan really wasn't her opponent. Chapter 225, Law Crushed. Where is Wu Shaochuan? Why is he not with you people? Yishuan asked in a dull voice. At the mention of this, Lu Yura's complexion slightly changed as she said, there was a clash of opinion between him and us, so he left. Just from the look on her face, Yi Xuan guessed that something was off, but he did not interrogate further. At this time, the crowd suddenly exclaimed that the law fragment had started to distort as if trying to escape from there and return to the place where it really belonged. The crowd continued to shout, and looked extremely anxious, but at this time, Yi Xuan finally jumped up and flew straight towards the law fragment, stretched out his hand and grabbed it. Stabs! The anomalous fragment abruptly cut a terrible wound on Yi Zaiwen's palm. When the spectators saw Yi Xuan directly reaching out to grab the law fragment, suddenly, the feeling of exultation spread in their hearts. After all, they were going to see how Yi Xuan would be torn to pieces by the fragment. One must know that this was no ordinary glass fragment or something, but a real space fragment. It didn't originate from a material existence but directly separated from the physical existence of space. Just like a person's shadow in a mirror that looked intact when the mirror was intact. But, as soon as the mirror was broken, the entire person's figure was also fragmented and changed back to the reality. No one would dare to directly grasp a law fragment. This was the reason why Battling Heaven's Brotherhood had made a lot of preparations. They had brought several magical tools to catch this law fragment. How could someone directly hold a law fragment? It was as if this person was courting death, but irrespective of what they assumed, Yi Xuan was not torn to pieces. Only his palm was slightly injured and bleeding, although he quite awkwardly dropped from the sky to the ground, but was still standing and looked all right. This suddenly caused commotion in the surrounding crowd. My God, how is he able to hold a law fragment in his hand? He looks like an ancient mythical god reborn. He is too fearful. How can he possess such a tyrannical body? No wonder he was able to suppress our chief from the outset. Having this kind of flesh is really insane. What we are witnessing is a miracle, isn't it? Nobody could achieve such a feat. At least they had not seen anyone do it before, but Yi Xuan did it right in front of their eyes and suddenly shocked the members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood. In fact, at this time, even the words weren't coming out of their mouths, including the latest stepping stone, Xiao Zhen, who appeared quite depressed and was looking at Yi Xuan with a baffled look in his eyes. Yi Zaiwen's bright red blood sprayed out from his palm, and actually contained a trace of golden thread. It was the result of divinity refined and assimilated by Yi Xuan in his body. At this time, Yi Xuan was incomparably amazed since this law fragment was too horrifying. Even though he was well prepared, with a protective cover of Zhen Yuan on his body, and he had also activated Tyrant Body technique, but his palm was still instantly cut open. Xiao Zhen's swordlight was unable to put even a scratch on his hand, but this blade law fragment was incredibly terrifying. Moreover, without feeling a shred of resistance, it instantly cut through his defenses and inflicted a cut wound on his palm. Like in his previous life, Yi Xuan used to easily cut through a piece of plastic foam with his finger, without feeling any resistance. Perhaps the fearfulness of Tyrant Body technique was beyond the comprehension of this world, but even so, its defense was easily cut open by the law fragment, cutting all the way to the bones. If Yi Xuan had not immediately activated Gilded Tyrant form and used the power of divinity, then his palm might have been chopped off by now. However, if Tyrant Body technique was practiced to its peak level, then it was possible for the practitioner to use bare hands for tearing off space, but right now, Yi Zaiwen's skill was not that high. Let alone tearing the space with bare hands, his palm was almost cut off by a law fragment. Fortunately, Yi Xuan managed to escape from this tragedy and the credit would entirely go to the divinity. The law fragment was struggling in vain and trying to escape. From the instant it was separated from the space, it was a separate entity with its own consciousness. If it could run away and find a place to hide, then after tens of thousands of years, perhaps, it would take the shape of an incomparably fearful expert with in-depth knowledge about the world law lingering inside it. Bang! The law fragment suddenly broke free from Yi Zaiwen's grasp, and his blood spattered as it took off instantly and fled towards the horizon. Look, the law fragment is escaping. I wonder what Yi Xuan will do next. Even the law fragment doesn't like him. Exactly. several members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood laughed and ridiculed him. As for them, it was the only thing they could do to retaliate against Yi Shiwen. However, Xiao Zhen and Lu Yueru were stubbornly staring at Yi Shiwen, eagerly waiting to see what he would do next. Yi Shiwen was not in a mood to come to terms with that law fragment. As soon as it escaped, he also immediately flew towards it and his hand instantly transformed into a huge coiling dragon. The coiling dragon was enveloped in a golden-colored light because of the divinity mixed with Zhen Yuan, and made it seem as if the dragon god himself had descended in this world. Yi Zaiwen's dragon claw was like a raging sea, scratching and tearing the world. A plume of divinity spread in the sky, and at that moment, it directly caught the law fragment. The divine element and law fragment had a fierce friction with each other in the hand of Yi Shiwen, and terrifying intermittent explosions took place as if resembling the birth of the universe. Using the divinity to firmly bind a law fragment was something only Yi Shiwen could achieve. It was simply unimaginable for other people to accomplish this. Everyone was shocked because they never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually be valiant enough to once again catch and directly hold the fleeing law fragment in his hand. His body, is it really a human body? It's like he has transplanted the body of a devil in his own body. He is incredibly strong. I wonder who can be his match later. With such strength, he can definitely be called a supreme-level expert in the younger generation. No one will dare to grasp a law fragment in their hand, but he actually did, which is simply unimaginable. Yi Shiwen grasped the law fragment in his hand and crushed it. In a flash, the law fragment crumpled and left everyone in a stunned state. Everyone was dumbfounded when they witnessed the law fragment being crushed to a powdered state in Yi Zaiwen's palm. A law in itself was not visible to human eyes, but as a fragment, it was very hard and sharp. Even a simple touch of law fragment could be fatal. But Yi Shiwen extraordinarily dared to grasp it. Moreover, he conveniently crushed it, as if it was nothing. Immediately, countless people exclaimed because this was simply a crime in their eyes. This was not just a casual heavenly treasure, but a precious law fragment. After all, it was a treasure which could help them in stepping into the legendary realm. Witnessing this kind of treasure, for them, was an extremely rare case that appeared only once in 100 years, and even if they could not obtain it, why waste it like this? Right in front of their eyes, Yi Zaiwen ruined a rare and extremely precious treasure. Chapter 226, Overnight Fame. If you want to step into the legendary realm, then you must spend decades finding answers to the questions posed by the secrets of world laws, and you must successfully manage to answer all of the featured questions, over the years, in order to pass the test. However, just now, the same priceless list of questions had been torn to pieces by Yi Shiwen. Wasting such a valuable treasure, in the eyes of everyone, was a serious crime. But in Yi Zaiwen's opinion, crushing this law fragment was no big deal, especially because he had mysterious space in his mind and it could help him in restructuring the broken information, then he could completely absorb and comprehend it. Yi Shiwen chose to crush the law fragment because keeping it intact was too dangerous. While he was holding it in his hand, it continued to cut and injure his palm, and if he was not careful, then it might cut through his whole body. He also knew that Battling Heaven's Brotherhood would surely spread the news about this incident and it might attract tyrannical experts to track him down. So, he decided to destroy the law fragment in front of everyone. On the Demon Island, a lot of tyrannical experts had formed alliances. For example, the Eagle Union consisted of several experts of Truth 7th stage, a few experts of Truth 8th stage and some terrifying existences of above Truth 8th stage as well. And, even the weakest members were at Truth 6th stage. However, was this really the extent of the current younger generation? Yi Shiwen did not believe in that. After all, he had seen that Taoist priest earlier, but was unable to see through the priest's cultivation level. He was using a high-level agility skill and must have had a very high cultivation level. Yi Shiwen believed that there were a lot of hidden experts like him on this island, and just to be on the safe side, he didn't want to attract their attention. Not to forget, the 8th prince had not yet made an appearance. There was a possibility that he was hiding somewhere on the island and practicing, probably, waiting for an opportunity to kill Yishuan. Yishuan didn't want to waste time on these things. He would prefer exploring this mysterious demon island. He had spent a month's time on this island but only explored the peripheral zones. He still didn't know what was present in the depths of the demon island. While holding the crumpled debris of law fragment in his hand, Yishuan flew away from there and soon disappeared in the horizon. Although the members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood were filled with hate and grinding their teeth, but no one dared to pursue Yishuan. After all, when a tyrannical expert like Lu Yueru chose not to battle with Yishuan, then how could they possibly think about going after him? The impression of Yi Zaiwen's incredible strength was deeply seared in their hearts. The news about the ninth law fragment instantly attracted the attention of many people. Excluding the 2 law fragments that fell into the hands of demon beasts, a total of 6 law fragments were seized by human experts. And now, they were shocked to find out from the members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood that the 9th law fragment was actually seized by a boy named Yishuan. But Yi Zaiwen's name became famous overnight. Counting out Wu Shaochuan, there were 2 peerless experts of truth's 6th stage in Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, making it one of the strongest alliances on the demon island. This was just like stealing food out of a tiger's mouth. The news about Xiaozhen's pathetic defeat at the hands of Yishuan really shocked the entire demon island. Not to mention, in the presence of so many members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, the 2 leaders of the alliance willingly handed over the law fragment to Yishuan. Just what kind of strength could make it possible? Eventually, the rumors put Yishuan among the numerous powerhouses of the demon island. However, the news about Yishuan crushing the law fragment made everyone jump up from shock. If he didn't want it, then why did he have to waste it like this? They were cursing Yishuan for such a foolish act, but they couldn't overlook the fact that he was formidable enough to hold a law fragment in his hand and casually crush it. This was a solid proof that he was indeed incredibly strong. No mortal could do such a thing and survive. In their eyes, Yishuan suddenly became a very mystical and horrifying existence, and at the same time, there were several experts who put down the thought of looking for Yishuan. Once a law fragment was broken, it turned completely useless, as if tearing an exam question paper to shreds. And who would go looking for a tyrannical powerhouse who was capable of crushing a law fragment? In the end, things turned out just the way Yishuan wanted. Anyway, in order to use a law fragment, one would need to be at least at half-step legendary level, and on this island, there were no experts of such level, and even if there were, no one dared to entertain such a terrifying idea. Just the way elderly fishermen did not dare to entertain the idea of monstrous tides, waiting to ambush them in the sea. Somewhere on the demon island, the 8th prince, clad in royal clothes, was sitting in a cave and practicing an outstanding technique. The shadowy figures of an azure dragon, a phoenix, a white tiger and a black tortoise were unceasingly glittering around the 8th prince while his aura was getting more and more formidable with each breath. After hearing the rumor about Yishuan, suddenly, a cold smile appeared on his face. I will let him enjoy for some time. His voice echoed throughout the cave. Since others could not comprehend from a crushed law fragment did not mean that Yishuan couldn't comprehend either. He had the help of mysterious space, which could help him in reconstructing and comprehending shattered or lost information. The only thing needed for that was Lingqi, and now with the help of upgraded Tianyuan mirror, the daily production rate of Ling Dawn had increased from 500 to 700. For ordinary martial techniques, this was enough, but not for comprehending a world law. The fundamental principles of this world were actually the final analysis of a particular phenomenon. For example, the sun always sets in the west was one law, water always flows from higher gravitational potential to lower gravitational potential was another law, but none of the above-mentioned laws explained the real reasons behind the phenomena. However, in the legendary realm, experts tried to understand world laws to a deeper level, by tackling the questions such as why water flowed downhill instead of going uphill. And for other experts, it might be very difficult to figure out the real reason behind these laws, but the same was not true for Yishuan. This time, being a person from the earth was his biggest advantage in this world. Although there were a lot of powerhouses in this world, but very few of them were inquisitive and took their own strength for granted, never questioning why they possessed such strength. All they needed to do was follow their predecessors in order to enhance their strength. There was a constant ongoing race with time in which they needed to cultivate and enhance their cultivation level, and at the same time, they needed to comprehend various martial techniques. They just needed to reach a certain level and comprehend martial techniques, even at the cost of not really knowing the reason behind them. It was not like they didn't want to know, instead did not need to know, because the time was a very tight factor during their practice. Xiantian level experts only had a lifespan of 200 years, and it was even less for Hotian level experts. There was no time for the experts to thoroughly understand each and every theory they were practicing. They were just following the path followed by their predecessors. In short, they were first focusing on cultivation and increasing their lifespan and would consider understanding things on a deeper level, later on. It was just like the exam-oriented education system from Yi Zaiwen's previous life. The college entrance examination was a node, and there was a total of 12 years from the beginning of elementary school education till the college entrance examination. As soon as you enroll in the school, the countdown of 12 years to college entrance examination begins. The teachers will begin to fill various types of concepts in your head, and it doesn't matter whether you understand them or not, you must deal with several intermediate examinations until you ultimately face the college entrance examination. But in this world, the node was life itself. A martial artist's life was long when compared to an ordinary person, but in order to achieve longer lifespan, they must cultivate and keep on practicing, and they were always short of time, so most of the time, it was necessary to give up on something to gain something necessary. And after stepping into the legendary realm, they finally started to catch up by cramming up ferociously. They must begin to study very thoroughly, even about the easiest of laws, and must find answers to the simplest of questions such as why does the sun set in the west? This was a huge shift in practice style, and not everyone could withstand this abrupt transformation. This was the problem of so-called fixed thinking, so only a small number of people could get used to this reversed notion, then continued to practice on the long road leading to a pious life. However, there was a shortcut to all this, and it was none other than the law fragment. A law fragment was like an encyclopedia, although some people never understood why the sun sets in the west, but they could still manage to find out from the encyclopedia that the reason was actually the Earth's rotation. A long time ago, someone did a lot of research and concluded that Earth's rotation was the reason why the sun sets in the west. Now, anyone could just read the conclusion in a book and understand the reason behind this law, so there was no need for self-comprehension anymore. Moreover, this was a question of ideas and could be reversed very easily. But for Yi Shiwen, this kind of thing was normal, although he did not possess formidable strength in his past life, but he had an inquisitive attitude. He was a curious guy in the past life and knew the importance of getting to the bottom of something in order to understand it better. Therefore, Yi Shiwen had an advantage over others, and because of this, even though he seized a law fragment, it would still not hinder him from being inquisitive. The crushed law fragment was absorbed into the mysterious space, then Yi Shiwen began to burn a lot of Ling Dan, which then transformed into Ling Qi and was injected into the mysterious space, little by little. This began to reorganize the sudden influx of information bit by bit. Chapter 227, Shuffles. Yi Shiwen spent almost 1 month in an unceasing absorption of the law fragment in powdered state. During this month, the entire Demon Island was in a state of turmoil. It was a chaotic time of conquests, and just because of the appearance of law fragments. 90% of truth-level disciples were deeply attracted towards law fragments, and reason was the sudden appearance of 9 law fragments. Excluding the 9th one, which was directly crushed by Yi Shiwen under the watchful eyes of several disciples, 2 law fragments had fallen into the grasp of formidable demon beasts. The remaining 6 were all up for grabs and resulted in several battles. As Yi Shiwen had previously guessed, several fierce experts were really hiding on this island. And during the contest for law fragments, there appeared a large number of horrifying experts of more than truth's 6th stage. Except the Eagle Union, the other 5 alliances, that had managed to obtain a law fragment each, were completely under siege from several other hidden destructive forces and undercover terrifying experts. This led to the destruction of many alliances, and in the end, these law fragments ended up in the grasp of the strongest. The Eagle Union was actually very stable. A group of people went looking for trouble, but the result was their own thorough annihilation instead. Henceforth, everyone approved that Eagle Union was the strongest alliance on the entire island and no one should provoke them. Some people tried searching for Yi Zaiwen but were unable to find him because they couldn't find his trailers if he was a ghost or something. Moreover, since he had crushed that law fragment, so they could only bitterly give up. After Yi Shiwen departed from there was a severe infighting among the members of Battling Heaven's Brotherhood, and as a result of that, the alliance completely dissolved. Afterwards, Xiao Zhen and Lu Yueru had a dramatic dispute, and Lu Yueru departed. In the end, Xiao Zhen led the remaining people to seek refuge in One True Alliance. This was the first reshuffle on the Demon Island and cropped up some of the original hidden forces, but Yi Shiwen knew that this would not be the last reshuffle because there were several horrifying experts still waiting and watching from shadows. They were not much attracted to the law fragments. After all, a year's time was left till the reopening of the island, and early exposure wasn't a good thing. Only those who get the last laugh are considered the winners. It was conceivable that there would be a terrible upheaval before the reopening of the Demon Island. Yi Shiwen did not want to be a part of this reshuffle. He was more interested in exploring the island's depths. But, Yi Shiwen did not go directly to the island's depths since he was looking for Wu Xiaochuan. During the reshuffle, Yi Shiwen finally heard news about Wu Xiaochuan and decided to go and meet him. He was also worried about Hua Menghan and Qin Ruochen because he got no news about them. He was hoping that Wu Xiaochuan would help him in getting information about their whereabouts. There was a stretch of several log cabins in a square, and Wu Xiaochuan was living in one of those cabins. Occasionally, terrifying beastly roars were coming from very far place. After arriving here, Yi Shiwen had a feeling of coming to the paradise with a peaceful and serene atmosphere. Yi Shiwen didn't approach, just deactivated restraining breath technique. Wu Xiaochuan sensed Yi Shiwen standing outside and immediately came out of his cabin. With a look of pleasant surprise on his face, he laughed and said, "Yi Shiwen, what brings you here?" "Of course, I have come to meet you." "Why did you leave Battling Heaven's Brotherhood?" Yi Shiwen asked. "I left because of that sly Xiao Zhen. He was secretly planning something behind the scenes and was about to start a war for power and his person profit. If not for giving face to Lu Yueru, I would have surely butchered him." Wu Xiaochuan answered, and this really surprised Yi Shiwen. This was the first time he witnessed Wu Xiaochuan's crazy side, which was quite contrasting to his usual jolly attitude. "But I knew that Battling Heaven's Brotherhood won't last long under his leadership. Yi Shiwen, you have become very famous these days. The whole island knows your name. Damn bro, you are really ruthless, actually crushed a law fragment." Wu Xiaochuan smiled and said, "It's such an honor to have a friend who has come from so far to visit us." Suddenly, a voice sounded from a nearby log cabin and a young Taoist priest came out from there. Yi Shiwen noticed that he was the same Taoist priest he saw earlier. "Taoist priest, the pleasure is all mine." Yi Shiwen cupped his hands and said, "Yi Shiwen, meet Qing Su." Wu Xiaochuan introduced them. "You can call me Qing Su and I'll just call you Yi Shiwen." Taoist priest was surprisingly not attaching any importance to superficial formalities. For Yi Shiwen, it was still very difficult to see through Qing Zu's cultivation. Even though his own cultivation level had increased since the last meeting, but he was again unable to sense Qing Zu's cultivation level. "How come you two are together?" Yi Shiwen asked. "We do not want to join any alliance, so we all decided to live in the same place and watch each other's back." Wu Xiaochuan smiled and said, "Wait, so there were more than just these two living here?" Yi Shiwen was now curious, since it looked like a small group of people who didn't want to be a part of any alliance. But, Yi Shiwen did know that this was no ordinary group. Wu Shaochuan was at the peak of truth's 6th stage, and even after the recent shuffling, he could be counted among the top experts on the island. But Qing Su was on a whole other level and would be counted among the handful of terrifying existences. Well, why don't you join us here? I think your strength is sufficient enough to be one of us. Wu Shaochuan indirectly tried to check what Yi Shiwen was thinking. After all, although their group had not become famous, but its battle efficiency was on par with the strongest active alliances on the Demon Island. No, I can bring a lot of trouble for you guys, and I don't want to see anyone hurt because of me. Yi Shiwen shook his head and refused. What he said was true, but more important was the fact that he needed to hunt as many gods' descendants as he could in order to perfect gilded tyrant form. And he certainly couldn't tell them about this. Oh, come on, we can deal with any trouble, and just because there is trouble out there, we must work together to tackle them. Wu Shaochuan laughed and said. But Qing Su immediately figured that Yi Shiwen did not want to join their group and said, Shaochuan, you don't have to force him. We are not an alliance, think of us as a group of people who have come together to mutually aid each other. Yi Shiwen, so long as you want, we will always welcome you in our group. Indeed, if there is anything you need help with, just ask. Wu Shaochuan said, although had only met Yi Shiwen a few times but had a good impression of him, probably because Yi Zaiwen's temperament was very much to his liking. These two really hit it off from the very first meeting. Precisely because of this, Yi Shiwen hoped that Wu Shaochuan would definitely help him out. And just now, he felt that his decision of meeting Wu Shaochuan was right. Although these experts were not part of any alliance, but should have a broad network of contacts, spread across several alliances. Actually, I want your help with something. Yi Shiwen didn't beat around the bush and directly said. Feel free and tell. Wu Shaochuan said. As I told you before, I was separated from the two fellow disciples of my sect earlier when we encountered Golden Winged Eagle. I hope you can help me in getting any information about them. Yi Shiwen said. Qing Su also remembered seeing two people with Yi Shiwen in the sea. It's a small thing, no problem. Wu Shaochuan beat his chest once and said in a confident tone. Also, I want you to help me in obtaining any news about Great Yu State's 8th prince. Yi Shiwen said. The 8th prince of your country, you mean Yui? Wu Shaochuan immediately said the 8th prince's name. After all, his own country had an old enmity with Great Yu State, so the royal clans of their country would obviously collect important information about each other. Wu Shaochuan's knowledge about Great Yu State's political situation was far more than that of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen said with a smile, he and I hold a personal grudge against each other. In fact, Yi Shiwen was most worried because Yui had remained silent for all this time. If he was on this island, then considering the hate he held for Yi Shiwen, once he got news about Yi Shiwen seizing a law fragment, he would definitely step out to kill him. Not to mention, if Yi Shiwen was able to obtain a law fragment, then it should be rather easier for Yui to get his hands on one. Now, Yui had sufficient time to consume the treasures he obtained from the ancient ruins. It was tough to guess the extent of his strength when he would appear in front of Yi Shiwen the next time. Hence, Yi Shiwen was eager to perfect gilded tyrant form before that. Wu Shaochuan was somewhat amazed, immediately raised up his thumb and said, terrific, this is even easier. I know about the existence of Great Yu State's Imperial Guards and Yui, the peerless genius who leads it. It seems you are going to teach this guy a good lesson. Not bad. Wu Shaochuan actually said in a way as if he was taking pleasure in others' misfortunes. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.